Welcome to Sleepy Otaku Stories. Tonight, we are entering the shadowed streets of Tokyo to follow the complete journey of Ken Kaneki, a quiet university student whose life changes forever when he is pulled into the hidden world of ghouls. Across 20 parts, we will move slowly through his fear, hunger, friendships, battles, losses, and the long search for a place where humans and ghouls might one day understand each other. Before we begin, please gently tap like and subscribe to Sleepy Otaku Stories. It helps the channel continue creating long, relaxing anime retellings like this one. Settle into a comfortable position, let the day grow quiet around you, and allow the story to carry you into the world of Tokyo Ghoul. Ken Kaneki had always felt safest between the pages of a book. Stories asked nothing from him except patience. And within their quiet worlds, he could sit beside strangers, cross distant cities, and understand hearts more easily than he understood his own. Most afternoons, he met his best friend Hideyoshi Nagachika at Anteku, a modest cafe tucked into the 20th ward. Hide filled the silence with teasing laughter, while Kaneki tried to disappear behind his novel, though his eyes repeatedly wandered toward the same table near the window. The young woman sitting there was Rise Kamishiro. She wore red-framed glasses and carried herself with such gentle confidence that Kaneki could hardly look at her without forgetting how to breathe. More astonishing still, she was reading The Black Goat's Egg, a novel by Sen Takatsuki, the very book Kaneki held in his own hands. Hide noticed immediately. With the delighted grin of a friend who had discovered a secret, he nudged Kaneki and encouraged him to speak to her, while Kaneki insisted that approaching someone so beautiful was far beyond anything he could manage. Anteku's employees quietly observed the scene from behind the counter. Toka Kirishima, a dark-haired waitress with a sharp and watchful gaze, served the customers while Yoshimura, the elderly manager, moved through the cafe with calm kindness. Neither interrupted the ordinary moment unfolding before them. To Kaneki, Anteku was simply a peaceful place filled with warm coffee and the soft rustle of turning pages. He had no way of knowing that nearly everyone around him understood the hidden world of ghouls far better than he did. When Rise finally noticed his book, Kaneki's impossible wish seemed to come true. Their shared affection for Takatsuki's writing gave him enough courage to speak, though his words emerged in nervous fragments. Rise listened with a graceful smile and seemed genuinely delighted to meet someone who understood the stories she loved. Before long, Kaneki asked her to spend time with him, and to his amazement, she agreed. Hide celebrated as though Kaneki had achieved something heroic, while Kaneki left the cafe wondering whether life could truly change in a single afternoon. Their date felt almost dreamlike. They wandered through a bookstore, speaking about novels and the strange emotions hidden inside them. Rise laughed softly at Kaneki's nervousness, and he slowly began to relax beside her. She seemed thoughtful, intelligent, and touched by the same loneliness that lived quietly within him. Kaneki imagined that perhaps she had recognized something familiar in him. For once, he did not feel like someone standing outside the world and watching everyone else live. Evening settled over the city before they began walking home. Streetlights cast long pools of gold across the pavement, and the busy roads gradually gave way to quieter paths. Rise moved closer to Kaneki and confessed that a dangerous ghoul had recently been seen in the neighborhood. Kaneki promised to walk her safely home, secretly pleased that she trusted him. When they entered an isolated construction area, Rise leaned against him as though she needed his protection. Then, without warning, her warmth disappeared. Her eyes darkened into the unmistakable red and black of a ghoul. The gentle girl from the cafe smiled with hunger as a crimson kagune unfurled behind her. Rize had not chosen Kaneki because of his kindness or their shared love of books. She had chosen him because she intended to eat him. Her attack pierced his body and threw him across the empty ground, leaving him stunned by pain and disbelief. As she approached, Rize mocked the fragile hope he had placed in their evening, and Kaneki realized that the person he thought he had met had never truly existed. Before Rize could finish her meal, a violent metallic groan sounded above them. Heavy steel beams broke loose from the construction site and crashed down through the darkness. Kaneki's last clear memory was the deafening impact and Rize disappearing beneath the fallen metal. He later awoke beneath bright hospital lights, his body covered in bandages and his thoughts drifting through a haze. A doctor explained that his life had been saved through an emergency transplant using organs taken from Rize. Kaneki closed his eyes, believing the nightmare had ended, unaware that a part of Rize was now living inside him, and that when he awakened fully, the world would never taste the same again. When Ken Kaneki returned home from the hospital, his apartment looked exactly as he remembered it. His books remained stacked beside the bed, unopened mail waited near the door, and the small kitchen offered the familiar comfort of ordinary life. Yet the moment he tried to eat, that comfort disappeared. Rice tasted like spoiled earth. Bread became something bitter and foul upon his tongue. Even foods he had once enjoyed made his stomach twist until he could no longer force them down. At first, Kaneki blamed the surgery. He told himself that the medicine had damaged his sense of taste and that everything would return to normal once his body recovered. He prepared one meal after another, searching desperately for anything he could swallow. Soon the table was covered with untouched plates and half-open packages. Nothing worked. Every flavor had become unbearable, while a strange and painful emptiness continued growing inside him. A television report played quietly in the room, describing another ghoul-related death. The program explained that ghouls could survive only by consuming human flesh, and that ordinary food tasted revolting to them. Kaneki stopped moving. The words seemed to draw together every fear he had tried to ignore. The red eye he had seen in the mirror, the impossible strength of his healing body, and the organs taken from Rize Kamishiro. He hurried to the bathroom and stared at his reflection. One eye remained his own, but the other had become black around a glowing red iris. Kaneki covered it with his hand, then looked again, hoping the change would disappear. It did not. In panic, he pressed a knife against his skin, desperate to prove that he was still an ordinary human. The blade bent without cutting him. Kaneki dropped it and sank toward the floor as the truth he feared settled around him. The hunger soon became stronger than thought. Every person in the city carried a scent he had never noticed before, warm and living beneath perfume, rain, and street smoke. Kaneki wandered through the night trying to escape it, only to be drawn toward an alley where a human body had been left behind. His mind recoiled, but his body moved closer. The smell promised relief from the pain that had hollowed him out since leaving the hospital. Toka Kirishima found him there. Away from Anteku's peaceful tables, she revealed the cold certainty of someone who had survived as a ghoul all her life. Kaneki pleaded with her, insisting that he was still human and could never eat another person. Toka answered that his body no longer cared what he wished to call himself. When he continued resisting, she forced a piece of flesh into his mouth so that he would understand what he had become. The taste brought immediate relief, and that relief horrified him more than the hunger itself. Before Toka's anger could carry the moment further, Yoshimura arrived and stopped her. The elderly manager of Anteku did not mock Kaneki's fear or demand that he abandon his human heart. He understood that Kaneki had awakened between two worlds without knowing the rules of either one. Yoshimura offered him a place at the cafe and promised that Anteku could help him survive without hunting innocent people. Kaneki was not ready to accept, but the gentleness in Yoshimura's voice remained with him. Hoping to hold on to something familiar, Kaneki returned to Kami University and met Hide. His best friend welcomed him with the same bright energy as always, speaking quickly enough to fill every silence between them. Kaneki tried to smile and behave as though his recovery had been ordinary. Yet even beside Hide, the hunger remained. He could hear the movement of blood beneath his friend's skin and smell the life within him. Ashamed, Kaneki kept his distance while Hide quietly noticed that something was wrong. Nishiki Nishio soon approached them. To Hide, Nishiki was merely an older student from the university. Kaneki knew better. He recognized the ghoul who had claimed territory in the 20th ward, and Nishiki recognized Rize's scent within him. Pretending to be friendly, Nishiki led them beneath a quiet overpass, far from the safety of the crowded streets. There, his human disguise disappeared. Nishiki struck Hide down and mocked Kaneki for trying to preserve a human friendship that could never survive the truth. Weak from starvation and inexperienced with his new body, Kaneki was unable to defend himself at first. Nishiki kicked him aside and turned toward Hide, intending to feed on the unconscious young man. The sight of his best friend in danger awakened something stronger than Kaneki's fear. A crimson kagune erupted from his back. The same power that had once belonged to Rize lashed through the air and overwhelmed Nishiki. Kaneki attacked with a strength he did not understand, driven by the desperate need to protect Hide. Nishiki was thrown aside, wounded and astonished by the half-ghoul he had considered helpless. But when the danger passed, Kaneki's hunger remained. He knelt beside Hide and smelled the blood from his wounds. For one terrible moment, the person Kaneki most wanted to protect became the meal his body desired most. His kagune trembled behind him as he leaned closer, fighting an instinct that felt stronger than his own will. Tears filled his eyes. He begged himself to stop, terrified that the first human he consumed would be the friend who had never abandoned him. Toka arrived before Kaneki lost control. She pulled him away from Hide and ended the struggle he could no longer win alone. When Kaneki next opened his eyes, he was inside Anteku. Hide had been taken somewhere safe, unaware of how close the night had come to ending differently. Yoshimura placed a cup of coffee before Kaneki. He explained that coffee was one of the few things both humans and ghouls could enjoy. Kaneki lifted the cup carefully and tasted something warm, familiar, and real for the first time since his surgery. Anteku could not return him to the life he had lost. But beneath its gentle lights, surrounded by people who understood the hunger he feared, Kaneki discovered that he might not have to face his new existence entirely alone. Anteku became the first place where Kaneki no longer had to pretend that nothing had changed. In the soft morning light, Yoshimura explained that the cafe was more than a quiet business hidden in the 20th ward. It was a refuge for ghouls who wished to live without hunting humans, a place where those who could not obtain food for themselves might receive help without taking another life. Kaneki listened with his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, relieved by Yoshimura's kindness, but troubled by what survival would still require. Even food gathered from those who had already died was human flesh, and accepting it felt like crossing a boundary from which he might never return. Yoshimura did not demand that Kaneki abandon his humanity. Instead, he offered him a small package and asked him to carry it home for the moment when his hunger became impossible to endure. Kaneki accepted it with trembling hands, then hid it in the deepest part of his refrigerator as though shutting the door could make the truth disappear. Night after night, he sat near it while his body weakened. He could smell what lay inside even through the wrapping, and the scent filled his apartment with a promise that frightened him more than pain. Yet each time he reached for it, he remembered the meals he had once shared with Hide and pulled his hand away. At Anteku, Tolka remained far less patient than Yoshimura. She believed Kaneki's refusal to accept what he had become was dangerous, not noble. A hungry ghoul could lose control without warning, and anyone nearby might become a victim. She taught him how to recognize ghoul territories, conceal his strange scent, and control the eye that appeared whenever his hunger or emotions grew too strong. Kaneki stumbled through every lesson, apologizing whenever he failed, while Tolka answered with sharp remarks that barely concealed her concern. She understood better than he did how quickly weakness could become fatal in the hidden world beneath Tokyo's ordinary streets. Kaneki also began working at the cafe. At first, even carrying cups seemed difficult because he was constantly afraid that customers might somehow recognize what he was. Yoshimura showed him how carefully ground beans, clean water, and patient preparation could transform coffee into something comforting. The familiar aroma helped steady Kaneki, and the simple rhythm of serving tables gave shape to his days. For a few hours at a time, he could almost imagine that he was merely a quiet student with an ordinary part-time job. Then Tolka would pass him behind the counter, and the understanding in her eyes would remind him that Anteku's peace existed only because everyone inside guarded its secret. Beyond the cafe, Tolka maintained a life that surprised him. She attended school, completed assignments, and spent time with her human friend, Yoriko Kosaka. Yoriko spoke to her without fear and often brought homemade food, which Tolka accepted despite being unable to enjoy it. Kaneki once watched Tolka force herself to swallow a piece with a strange smile so that Yoriko would not feel rejected. The effort left her visibly ill afterward, but she dismissed the pain as unimportant. For Kaneki, the moment revealed a side of Tolka that her harsh words often concealed. She was not protecting only herself. Like him, she was struggling to preserve a precious human bond in a world that would condemn her if the truth were known. Hide remained Kaneki's most precious connection to that world. When they met at the university, Hide chatted cheerfully about classes and classmates, apparently accepting Kaneki's explanation that the surgery had left him with a delicate stomach. Kaneki smiled and tried to behave as he always had, though every sound and scent around them had become sharper. He could hear heartbeats in crowded hallways and smell blood beneath human skin. None was more familiar than Hide's. The realization filled him with shame, and he began keeping a careful distance even while longing for the effortless closeness they had once shared. Eventually, the hunger overcame Kaneki's resistance. Alone in his apartment, too weak to stand steadily, he opened the refrigerator and removed Yoshimura's package. He wept before taking the smallest bite, not because the taste was horrible, but because it was not. His body welcomed it with a relief no ordinary meal had ever given him. For a few terrible moments, the pain vanished completely. Kaneki sat in the silence afterward, grieving the part of himself that believed accepting food meant becoming a monster. Yet somewhere beneath that grief, Yoshimura's words remained. The manner in which a person survives does not alone determine the kindness within their heart. To protect his identity, Yoshimura later sent Kaneki and Taoka to the Heisei art mask studio. Its owner, Uta, greeted them with an unsettling smile, dark eyes, and tattoos that made him appear dangerous even among ghouls. Yet his manner was calm and almost playful as he measured Kaneki's face. Uta explained that masks allowed ghouls to conceal themselves from the CCG investigators known as doves. For Kaneki, he created a black leather mask with an eye patch, exposed teeth, and a zipper drawn across the mouth, a face far more frightening than the timid young man beneath it. When Kaneki looked at the finished mask, he saw neither the human he had been nor the ghoul he feared becoming. He saw someone standing uneasily between both worlds, still searching for a way to belong. As Kaneki slowly became more comfortable at Anteku, he began to understand that not every danger in the ghoul world announced itself with open violence. Some arrived wearing elegant clothing, speaking with perfect manners, and smiling as though they had come only to discuss books. Shu Tsukiyama was such a ghoul. Known throughout the wards as the gourmet, Tsukiyama treated food as an art, and every unusual flavor as something to be treasured. The moment he caught Rize Kamishito's scent upon Kaneki, ordinary curiosity became obsession. Kaneki was neither entirely human nor entirely ghoul, and to Tsukiyama, that made him a delicacy unlike anything else in Tokyo. Kaneki did not immediately recognize the danger. Tsukiyama spoke intelligently about literature, praised the same authors Kaneki admired, and carried himself with a polished warmth that made his attention seem flattering rather than threatening. Toka distrusted him at once. She warned Kaneki that the gourmet did not form friendships in the ordinary sense. He judged people by how rare and desirable they might taste. Kaneki nevertheless accepted Tsukiyama's invitation to visit a private gathering of ghouls. He hoped to understand more about the hidden society into which he had been forced. Instead, he entered an extravagant restaurant where masked guests gathered around a circular chamber to watch human beings prepared as entertainment. Kaneki discovered too late that he was not a guest. He was the meal. A massive executioner entered to kill him before the watching crowd. Yet when the blade struck Kaneki, it failed to cut through his ghoul body. The spectators complained that the promised human was something else entirely, and the carefully planned feast collapsed into confusion. Tsukiyama intervened, unwilling to allow the others to consume something he had decided should belong only to him. Kaneki escaped the restaurant, shaken but alive. Tsukiyama later pretended that he too had been deceived, preserving the mask of friendship while preparing a more private meal. Meanwhile, Kaneki found Nishiki Nishio badly injured by other ghouls. Nishiki had once attacked both Kaneki and Hide, yet Kaneki could not leave him helpless. He brought Nishiki home and met Kimi Nishino, the human woman caring for him. Kimi already knew that Nishiki was a ghoul. After losing her family, she had found a reason to continue living through him. When Nishiki's injuries left him starving, she had willingly allowed him to bite her shoulder so he could recover. Kaneki was astonished by the trust between them. He had feared that any human who learned the truth about a ghoul would respond with terror. Kimi had seen Nishiki's hunger and chosen to remain. Kaneki agreed to obtain food from Anteku for him. While he was gone, Tsukiyama abducted Kimi and left behind a rose with a written invitation. Nishiki forced himself from bed and accompanied Kaneki, despite his weakness. Together, they followed Tsukiyama's directions to an abandoned church. Candles illuminated the dark interior, and solemn music echoed between the old stone walls. Kimi lay bound upon the altar, while Tsukiyama waited nearby, delighted that every part of his planned meal had arrived. His intention was grotesquely precise. He wanted Kaneki to eat Kimi. After Kaneki had consumed a human who mattered to him, Tsukiyama believed his flavor would become richer with guilt, sorrow, and desperation. Then the gourmet would consume Kaneki himself. Nishiki attacked first, Though weakened, he rushed toward Tsukiyama to protect Kimi. The gourmet's elegant kagune formed a sharp, spiraling blade that struck him down almost immediately. Kaneki joined the fight, but his inexperience left him unable to match Tsukiyama's speed and control. Toka suddenly entered the church and attacked Tsukiyama from behind. She had followed them after realizing that something was wrong. Yet she was not at full strength. To preserve her friendship with Yoriko, Toka had forced herself to eat the human food her friend lovingly prepared. The meal had made her ill and weakened her body, leaving her unable to summon the full power of her kagune. Kaneki and Toka fought together. For brief moments, their movements forced Tsukiyama backward. Kaneki refused to become the meal the gourmet imagined, while Toka attacked with the fury of someone who had long despised Tsukiyama's selfish cruelty. But Tsukiyama was stronger. He wounded Kaneki through the abdomen and tasted his blood, becoming almost overwhelmed by its unusual flavor. He then struck Toka down, leaving both of them too injured to continue. With Nishiki unconscious and Kimi still trapped upon the altar, the gourmet believed his perfect feast could finally begin. Tsukiyama mocked their weakness. Without enough nourishment, he explained, a ghoul could not produce the power needed to fight. Human flesh was the fuel upon which their kagunes depended. Kaneki listened. Then he looked toward Toka. He understood what had to be done. Kaneki offered her his own flesh. Toka hesitated only briefly before biting into his shoulder. The pain passed through him, but Kaneki remained still. He was giving away part of his body because Toka's skill offered their only chance of rescuing Kimi and Nishiki. The bite enraged Tsukiyama. To him, Kaneki was a rare treasure that belonged solely to the gourmet. Watching Toka taste what he had been saving for himself shattered the last of his elegant composure. Toka rose. The nourishment restored enough of her strength for a brilliant wing-shaped kagune to unfold from her back. Crystalline shards of crimson light filled the church as she deflected Tsukiyama's attack. She reminded him that no one there belonged to him. Their battle resumed with new force. Toka's speed returned, and she began breaking through Tsukiyama's defenses. When he turned toward Kimi in desperation, Nishiki forced himself upright and placed his body between them, enduring Tsukiyama's attacks rather than allowing him to reach her. That devotion distracted the gourmet long enough for Toka to strike. Her kagune pierced him and sent him crashing among the church's broken stones. Tsukiyama continued reaching toward Kaneki, still unwilling to release the meal that had consumed his thoughts. Toka struck him down once more, and coldly suggested that, if he was so hungry, he could eat himself. Nishiki freed Kimi from the altar, yet the danger had not entirely passed. Kimi had seen Toka's kagune and now knew the truth about everyone in the church. Toka believed that allowing a human witness to leave could endanger them all. When Kaneki tried to stop her, Toka's anger only deepened. She prepared to fire her kagune toward Kimi. Nishiki shielded her with his body. Kimi's blindfold slipped away. She looked directly at Toka's crimson kagune. Toka expected fear, disgust, or the accusation that she was a monster. Instead, Kimi softly called it beautiful. The words left Toka unable to move. She had spent her life believing that humans would reject every part of what she was. Kimi had looked upon the feature Toka considered most monstrous and found beauty within it. Toka fled the church in confusion. Kaneki remained beside Nishiki and Kimi, carrying the ache from Toka's bite, but also a new understanding. A human could know a ghoul's secret and remain. A ghoul could offer part of himself to save a human. The boundary between their worlds was still dangerous, but it was not completely unbreakable. That fragile possibility would soon become even more important when a gentle young ghoul named Hinami entered Kaneki's life. Some of Anteiku's most peaceful afternoons were spent at a small table near the window, where Ken Kaneki helped Hinami Fueguchi understand the difficult words in her books. Hinami was quiet and gentle, with a curiosity that slowly overcame her shyness whenever they began to read. Kaneki patiently explained each unfamiliar phrase, and Hinami listened as though every answer opened a new little world. Their lessons gave Kaneki a sense of purpose he had rarely felt since becoming a ghoul. Around Hinami, he did not have to be strong or frightening. He only had to remain beside her. Hinami's mother, Ryoko, watched them with a grateful but weary smile. She had brought her daughter to Anteiku because their family was already in danger. Hinami's father, Asaki Fueguchi, had been killed by investigators from the Commission of Counter-Ghoul. The CCG called its investigators doves because of the pale coats they wore. But among ghouls, those coats were often seen as a warning that death was approaching. Ryoko tried to shield Hinami from the truth, hoping her daughter might retain a little innocence despite everything their family had lost. The investigators searching for them were Kotaro Amon and his senior partner, Kureo Mado. Amon was serious and disciplined, carrying a deep conviction that ghouls existed only to prey upon humanity. Mado was far more unsettling. He spoke with an almost cheerful fascination about kagunes and the quinqués created from them, studying each ghoul as though it were nothing more than material for another weapon. He had already taken the kagune of Hinami's father and transformed it into a tool he carried while hunting the man's surviving family. One evening, Ryoko and Hinami were discovered before they could return safely to Anteiku. Mado cornered them in a quiet place away from the crowded streets, knowing that Ryoko would be unable to fight freely while protecting her daughter. Ryoko released her kagune and stood between Hinami and the approaching investigator. She understood that she could not defeat him, but victory was not what she needed. She needed only enough time for her daughter to escape. Ryoko ordered Hinami to run. Hinami fled through the darkened streets while the sounds of battle followed behind her. She wanted to turn back, yet her mother's final command carried her forward. Ryoko fought with every fragment of strength she possessed, but Mado overcame her and claimed another kagune from the Fueguchi family. When Hinami eventually reached safety, she returned without her mother. The child who had once sat quietly beside Kaneki's books was now alone in the world. Toka's grief quickly hardened into anger. She knew how easily ghouls could disappear without anyone in the human world mourning them, and she refused to allow Ryoko's death to pass without an answer. Kaneki feared what revenge might do to Toka, but he also understood that the investigators would continue hunting Hinami unless they were stopped. Together, they devised a way to confront Mado and Amon while keeping the investigators separated. Kaneki faced Amon beneath the city lights. Wearing the black mask Uta had made for him, he appeared to the investigator as another dangerous ghoul. Yet Kaneki had no desire to kill him. Amon attacked with the quinqué created from Hinami's father's kagune, fighting with the certainty that every ghoul before him was an enemy of humanity. Kaneki defended himself and gradually gained the advantage, damaging Amon's weapon and forcing him to the ground. Yet Kaneki did not deliver the final blow. Instead, he begged Amon to leave. He told him that he did not want to become a murderer and that killing one another would only deepen the hatred separating their worlds. Amon stared at the masked ghoul in confusion. Everything he had been taught told him that ghouls were merciless creatures driven by hunger. yet the one standing above him had chosen to spare his life. Kaneki left him there with a shattered quinque and a question that would remain long after their battle ended. Elsewhere, Toka and Hinami confronted Mado. The older investigator revealed the terrible trophies he had taken from their family. One quinque carried the shape of Hinami's father's kagune. The other had been created from Ryoko after her death. Mado wielded the remains of Hinami's parents against their own daughter, speaking of them as weapons rather than people who had once loved and protected her. The sight awakened something within Hinami. Two kagunes emerged from her body, one resembling her father's and the other carrying the shape of her mother's. For a moment, it seemed as though both of her parents had returned to stand beside her. Hinami's power shattered Mado's defenses and left him helpless before her. Mado demanded that she finish him. Hinami could not. Despite everything he had taken from her, she refused to become the person who ended his life. Her grief was immense, but it had not erased the gentleness her parents had given her. Toka understood the choice Hinami had made. She stepped forward and struck Mado herself, ending the threat before he could hurt the child again. Amon arrived too late and found his mentor lying still. To him, Mado had been more than an investigator. He had been a teacher and a father figure whose loss now became another reason to hate ghouls. Yet somewhere beneath that grief remained the memory of the eye-patched ghoul who had spared him. On both sides of the conflict, families mourned people the other side considered monsters. Hinami returned to Anteku carrying sorrow far too heavy for someone so young. Kaneki sat beside her at their familiar table and opened one of her books. He did not tell her that everything would soon be all right, because they both knew some wounds could not be repaired so easily. Instead, he remained with her in the quiet cafe, turning the pages slowly and helping her understand one word at a time. It was a small act of kindness in a world filled with hatred. For that evening, it was enough. In the days after Kureo Mado's death, sorrow lingered on both sides of the hidden war. At Anteku, Hinami learned how to live with the absence of her parents, surrounded by people who quietly watched over her. Elsewhere, Kotaro Amon attended Mado's funeral and saw the investigator not as the relentless hunter ghouls had feared, but as a husband, a father, and a mentor whose family now mourned him. The sight unsettled Amon. Kaneki's mercy still troubled him as well, leaving him with questions he could not yet bring himself to answer. Kaneki also continued searching for answers. Rise's organs had changed his entire existence, yet he knew almost nothing about the woman whose hunger now lived inside him. Uta and Renji Yomo brought him to Helter Skelter, a dim underground bar run by the lively and perceptive Itori. She spoke of rumors surrounding one-eyed ghouls and suggested that the accident which killed Rise might not have been an accident at all. Someone, she hinted, may have wanted Rise removed. Kaneki left with more uncertainty than before, but also with the growing suspicion that his transformation belonged to a mystery far larger than his own misfortune. Around the same time, Nishiki began working at Anteku. He complained about the uniform, argued with Toka, and behaved as though every task beneath the cafe lights were an insult to his dignity. Yet his presence carried a quiet meaning. He had once treated the 20th Ward as nothing more than territory, but Kimi's love and Kaneki's unexpected help had given him a reason to remain near others. Anteku was slowly gathering people who had once believed they could survive only by standing alone. Their fragile peace was interrupted when several exhausted ghouls arrived at the cafe. Their leader was Kazuichi Banjo, a broad-shouldered man whose intimidating appearance concealed a warm and loyal heart. He had known Rise when she controlled the 11th Ward and had admired her deeply, though she had never returned his feelings. Banjo warned Yoshimura that a violent organization called Aogiri Tree had conquered the ward and was searching for Rise. When he discovered that Kaneki carried her scent, Banjo became confused and suspicious, but there was little time to question him. Aogiri's hunters soon entered the 20th Ward. Among them was Ayato Kirishima, Toka's younger brother, whose cold manner and fierce strength revealed how far he had separated himself from her. Beside him came Yamori, the enormous and unstable ghoul feared under the name Jason. Yamori wore a mask shaped like a hockey mask and repeatedly cracked his fingers with a sound that made the room feel colder. Tatara, one of Aogiri's commanders, watched from behind his red mask, while the silent Noro stood nearby like a shadow that could not be moved. Toka confronted Ayato, demanding to know why he had joined people who brought only destruction. Ayato answered with contempt, insisting that strength was the only law ghouls could trust. Their brief clash was filled with more than anger. Toka remembered the younger brother she had once tried to protect, while Ayato seemed determined to bury every trace of the boy he had been. When Kaneki attempted to defend her, Yamori immediately noticed Rise's scent upon him. To Aogiri, the timid young man from Anteku had suddenly become far more valuable than anyone expected. Kaneki was taken to Aogiri's stronghold in the 11th Ward, along with Banjo and several of his followers. Inside the ruined building, Kaneki saw frightened ghouls being forced to serve an organization that claimed to offer freedom through violence. Banjo explained that many members had joined only because resistance meant death. Despite being injured and powerless, he still tried to protect the others, and Kaneki recognized in him the same kindness that appearances so often concealed. Together, the prisoners attempted to escape through the corridors of the hideout. For a brief time, hope carried them forward. Then Noro appeared. Wounds that should have stopped any living creature closed almost instantly upon his body, and the escape collapsed before it truly began. Kaneki tried to shield Banjo and the others, but Yamori reclaimed him with delighted cruelty. He had already decided that Kaneki would become the subject of his private amusement. Far away, Anteku prepared to bring him home. Toka refused to remain behind. Nishiki joined despite his complaints, and even Tsukiwama offered his strength, unwilling to let anyone else possess the person who fascinated him most. Yomo, Uta, and the others gathered their masks while Yoshimura quietly planned their approach. At the same time, the CCG mobilized for a massive assault on Aogiri's fortress. As investigators and ghouls moved toward the same battlefield, Kaneki sat alone in a sealed room and heard Yamori's fingers crack in the darkness. He did not yet know how long the night ahead would be, or that the person who finally walked out of that room would no longer be the same young man who had entered it. Time lost its ordinary meaning inside Yamori's chamber. There were no windows through which Kaneki could watch morning become evening, only a dim light hanging above the chair where he had been restrained. Yamori spoke to him almost pleasantly, as though the room were not a place of suffering, but a classroom in which he intended to teach a single lesson. The weak existed for the amusement of the strong. Whenever Kaneki's mind began to drift away, Yamori ordered him to count backward from 1,000 by sevens. 993, 986, 979. The numbers became stones Kaneki placed one after another across an endless darkness, each one helping him remain himself for a few moments longer. Yamori had once been a prisoner of the CCG, tormented by an investigator until pain twisted into the cruelty he now inflicted upon others. He repeated the gestures of the man who had broken him, even cracking his fingers in the same deliberate manner. Kaneki's ghoul body healed wounds that should have ended the ordeal, allowing Yamori to begin again whenever he pleased. At one point, he released a red-headed centipede near Kaneki's ear, knowing that even the thought of it would fill the silence with terror. Kaneki tried to retreat into memories of Anteku, the warmth of Yoshimura's coffee, Hinami turning the pages of a book, Hide laughing beside him. But Yamori patiently followed him into every place he tried to hide. Beyond the sealed room, battle spread through Aogiri's stronghold. The CCG stormed the building from one direction, while Anteku's rescue group entered from another, each unaware of how close their paths might come. Amon and the investigators fought through Aogiri's defenders beneath flashing lights and falling debris. Toka searched urgently for Kaneki, accompanied by Nishiki, Yomo, Uta, and Tsukiyama. Even Tsukiyama's motives could not be called entirely selfless, yet his determination was genuine. None of them intended to leave the quiet young man behind. Kaneki's thoughts eventually carried him to his childhood. He remembered his mother, whose gentle smile had hidden an exhaustion he had been too young to understand. She had taught him that it was better to be hurt than to hurt someone else, and Kaneki had built his entire life around those words. When his aunt repeatedly asked for help, his mother gave everything she had until overwork took her from him. Afterward, Kaneki lived quietly beneath his aunt's roof, enduring loneliness rather than causing trouble. He had mistaken silent suffering for kindness because it was the only form of love he had been shown. Within his mind, Rize appeared among fields of pale flowers. She no longer wore the soft expression she had used during their date. She laughed at the rules Kaneki had followed and asked what his kindness had ever protected. By refusing to act, he had allowed others to make every choice for him. By accepting every wound, he had left the people he loved vulnerable. Kaneki resisted her words, insisting that he never wanted to become someone who harmed others. Yet Rize did not ask him to abandon compassion. She asked him whether compassion without strength was enough. Yamori then brought two of Banjo's imprisoned companions into the chamber and demanded that Kaneki choose which one would live. Kaneki pleaded for both of them, unable to condemn either person. Yamori laughed and killed them regardless. Something inside Kaneki finally became still. He understood that refusing to choose had not saved anyone, and that suffering quietly would never satisfy a person like Yamori. In the flower-filled world of his mind, Kaneki turned toward Rize. Rather than allowing her hunger to consume him, he embraced the power she represented and declared that he would accept what he had become. The pale flowers darkened around them, and Kaneki devoured the vision that had haunted him since the night of their date. When he opened his eyes, his black hair had become white. His voice was calm, and the fear Yamori had enjoyed was gone. Kaneki slipped free of his restraints, twisted his body back into place, and stood before his captor with an unsettling quietness. Yamori attacked with his kagune, but Kaneki moved with a speed and precision he had never possessed before. He tore through the larger ghoul's defenses, broke his fingers as Yamori had broken his, and softly instructed him to count backward from 1,000 by sevens. The words that had once kept Kaneki imprisoned now announced that the balance between them had changed. Kaneki defeated Yamori and consumed part of his kagune, gaining the strength he needed to continue through the collapsing fortress. He soon found Toka at the mercy of Ayato, who mocked his sister for clinging to human friendships and a peaceful life. Kaneki stepped between them, carrying none of his former hesitation. When Ayato attacked, Kaneki overwhelmed him and declared that he would only half kill him, breaking enough of his bones to leave him helpless while sparing his life for Toka's sake. Afterward, Kaneki lifted the wounded Toka into his arms. She looked at his white hair and unfamiliar expression, recognizing the person she had come to rescue, while sensing how much of him had been left behind in Yamori's room. Kaneki carried her through the ruins, stronger than he had ever been, but the road leading him home had already begun to divide. When the fighting at Aogiri's stronghold finally ended, the people of Anteku expected Ken Kaneki to return with them. Toka had crossed the battlefield to rescue him. Nishiki, Yomo, Tsukiyama, Hinami, and the others had entered the ruins believing that, once Yamori was defeated, they could bring the quiet young man home. But the person who emerged from Yamori's chamber had already made another choice. Kaneki stood beneath the night sky, with white hair, dark clothing, and an expression Toka no longer recognized. He told her that he would not return to Anteku. Instead, he intended to go with Aogiri Tree, the same organization that had captured and tortured him. Toka could not understand his decision. Aogiri had invaded their ward, injured the people he cared about, and delivered him into Yamori's hands. Yet, Kaneki believed remaining close to Anteku would only continue placing everyone there in danger. If he entered Aogiri, he might discover the organization's plans and gain enough strength to prevent anyone else from suffering because of him. He did not explain all of this aloud. Kaneki had grown accustomed to carrying pain without allowing others to share it. He believed that leaving was an act of protection, even though the people watching him walk away experienced it as abandonment. Toka called after him, but Kaneki continued toward Ayato and the remaining members of Aogiri. The distance between them widened with every step. At Anteku, his absence became part of the cafe's silence. Hinami continued thinking of the older brother who had helped her read and comforted her after the loss of her parents. She wondered whether Kaneki had joined Aogiri because he no longer needed them, or because he was facing some danger he could not reveal. Toka responded differently. She tried to force Kaneki from her thoughts by preparing for college. She studied late into the evening, surrounded by books and examination papers, as though building a future for herself might make his disappearance easier to bear. Yoshimura watched over both girls without condemning Kaneki. The old manager understood that Kaneki's decision had grown from fear rather than cruelty. Kaneki had accepted the belief that he alone must become strong enough to carry every danger. Yoshimura knew that such a path could lead him far from the people he wished to protect. Within Aogiri, Kaneki became a silent presence among masked ghouls. He wore their dark clothing and followed their commanders, but he never appeared to share their hunger for destruction. Ayato remained openly hostile toward him, remembering the humiliating defeat Kaneki had given him during the rescue. Others whispered about the eye-patched ghoul. Some had heard that Kaneki had defeated Yamori. Others claimed that he had consumed part of the powerful ghoul and gained new strength through cannibalism. Kaneki ignored the rumors and kept his purpose hidden. Aogiri soon moved against a CCG transport vehicle. Inside was Naki, one of Yamori's most devoted followers. Naki had been captured and was being carried beneath heavy guard when Kaneki, Ayato, and the other Aogiri ghouls attacked the convoy. The assault came swiftly. Vehicles were overturned, investigators were forced back, and Ayato tore through the convoy's defenses while Kaneki opened the path toward the prisoner. Even after everything Yamori had done to him, Kaneki helped free the person who had loved the torturer as an older brother. Naki emerged expecting Yamori to be waiting for him. Instead, he learned that his leader was dead. The news broke through his rough and threatening manner. Naki wept openly for the ghoul he called Big Bro, unable to imagine Aogiri without him. To Kaneki, Yamori had been the person who shattered his mind and body. To Naki, he had once been a protector who gave him a place to belong. Kaneki did not reveal his role in Yamori's defeat. Naki remained unaware that the white-haired ghoul standing before him had been the last person to fight his leader. When Kaneki helped him write Yamori's name correctly, Naki thanked him and declared that he was a good person. Kaneki accepted the gratitude in silence. The moment reminded him that one life could hold entirely different meanings depending upon who remembered it. Yamori had been both a victim of cruelty and a creator of it, a savior in Naki's memory and a monster in Kaneki's. While Kaneki moved deeper into Aogiri, Hinami visited a book signing event held by the famous novelist Sen Takatsuki. She carried one of Takatsuki's novels and waited patiently for her turn. When she reached the author's table, Hinami asked her to write Ken Kaneki's name inside the book. Hinami intended to give it to him someday. She did not know where Kaneki was or when she might see him again, but the carefully inscribed name became a small promise that she would continue waiting for his return. Tolka searched for her own connection to Kaneki. Nishiki brought her to Kamii University, where Kaneki had once studied alongside Hide. The campus was filled with ordinary students moving between classes, unaware that one of their former classmates had become a figure whispered about by both ghouls and investigators. Tolka noticed a poster bearing Kaneki's face. He was listed as missing. The image showed the gentle, dark-haired student who had once sat inside Onteku with a book open before him. It seemed almost impossible to connect that face with the white-haired ghoul now moving beneath Aogiri's banners. At the university, Tolka encountered Hideyoshi Nagachika. Hide recognized her from Onteku. Their conversation remained cautious, but both were searching for the same person. Tolka knew what Kaneki had become, but could not reveal it. Hide possessed only fragments of the truth, yet his cheerful manner could not completely conceal his concern. Hide had not abandoned his friend. He had begun working as a messenger for the CCG, using the position to listen, observe, and quietly gather information. He learned that investigators were searching for an eye-patched, one-eyed ghoul connected to recent Aogiri operations. The CCG was also collecting clues surrounding Kaneki's disappearance and Rize Kamishiro's death. Hide listened closely without revealing how much the missing student's name meant to him. Kaneki believed he had left his human life behind to protect it. Yet Hide, Tolka, Hinami, and the investigators were all following the trail he had left behind. Soon, Aogiri would begin preparing an attack upon Cochlea, the CCG's most heavily guarded ghoul prison. Kaneki had walked away from Onteku, searching for strength and answers. The path ahead would bring him into a place built to ensure that even the strongest ghouls could never escape. After the convoy attack, Aogiri Tree turned its attention toward Cochlea. The prison stood deep within the 23rd Ward, protected by reinforced walls, armed investigators, and security systems designed to contain some of the most dangerous ghouls in Tokyo. Inside, Kotaro Amon and Akira Mado visited a prisoner named Donato Porpora. Donato was the SS-rated ghoul who had raised Amon inside an orphanage. To the young Amon, he had once seemed like a gentle father. The truth was far more terrible. Donato had secretly murdered and consumed the children placed under his care. Amon had survived only because Donato chose not to kill him. Even after becoming an investigator, Amon could not completely separate his memories of the caring man who raised him from the ghoul imprisoned before him. He and Akira had come seeking information about the owl. Donato answered their questions with the calm intelligence of someone who enjoyed placing doubt inside other people. Before the interrogation could reveal much, alarms began sounding throughout Cochlea. Aogiri Tree had arrived. Explosions tore through the upper levels as masked ghouls descended into the prison. Guards rushed toward the damaged sections, while cell doors began opening across several floors. Kaneki entered with Ayato and the other Aogiri fighters. He did not share their excitement over the attack. Since leaving Anteku, he had followed Aogiri to learn more about its power and the enemies gathering around the people he wished to protect. But every mission carried him farther from the gentle life he once knew. Kaneki and Ayato descended through Cochlea together before the chaos separated them. Kaneki continued alone, passing open cells and fleeing prisoners until he reached one door that had remained locked. A powerful ghoul waited inside. His name was Sachi. Kaneki attempted to release him, but Sachi immediately noticed something unusual. The scent surrounding Kaneki belonged to someone he knew. Rize Kamishiro. Sachi had once cared for Rize and trained her when she was younger. Now her scent came from the body of a stranger standing before him. He attacked without warning. Kaneki released his Kagune and attempted to defend himself. But Sachi's strength was unlike anything he expected. The older ghoul possessed extraordinary speed, disciplined martial arts, and complete control over every movement. Kaneki's Kagune pierced him. Sachi tore himself free almost immediately. He struck Kaneki again and again, overwhelming the younger ghoul before Kaneki could adjust to his fighting style. One final blow sent Kaneki crashing through several walls and into a dark chamber below. Sachi attempted to follow him. Eto appeared before he could continue. She asked whether he wished to see Rize, drawing his attention away from the defeated Kaneki. Whatever Eto knew about Rize was enough to make Sachi leave with her. Kaneki remained alone among the ruins. Bones lay scattered throughout the darkened chamber. He remembered why he had entered Aogiri Tree. He wanted enough strength to protect Toka, Hinami, Hide, and everyone at Anteku. Yet every attempt to become stronger seemed to draw him deeper into hunger and violence. During his time away from Anteku, Kaneki had begun consuming other ghouls. Cannibalism increased a ghoul's power, but it also changed the body and damaged the mind. The RC cells accumulating inside Kaneki had begun forming something beyond an ordinary Kagune. Pain moved through him. A dark mask of flesh spread across his face. A long, armored Kagune, resembling a centipede, emerged from his back. Kaneki's first, incomplete Kakuja had awakened. Elsewhere inside Cochlea, Ayato confronted Yukinori Shinohara. Shinohara wore a suit of armor created from the Kagune of a powerful ghoul known as Arata. The armor increased the investigator's strength and protected his body from attacks that would normally have killed him. Arata had been the father of Toka and Ayato. Ayato attacked furiously, but Shinohara's armor allowed him to overpower the young ghoul. The weapon created from his father's body now struck him again and again. Nearby, Juzo Suzuya confronted Korona and Nashiro Yasuhisa. The twins had once lived in the same CCG institution as Juzo, before Dr. Kano transformed them into artificial, one-eyed ghouls. Though they attacked together, Juzo showed no hesitation toward his former companions. The prison became a maze of personal histories turned into violence. Kaneki emerged from the lower chamber in his centipede form. His movements had changed. The incomplete Kakuja gave him tremendous speed and strength, but his mind was becoming unstable beneath it. His voice shifted between laughter, pain, and broken memories of Yamori's torture. Shinohara confronted him. The Arata armor protected the investigator as Kaneki's Kagune struck with enough force to tear apart the walls around them. Shinohara endured the first attacks and managed to land a powerful blow that briefly shattered Kaneki's Kakuja. Kaneki fell. Then he rose again. His ordinary Kagune unfolded behind him as the centipede armor returned around his body. He moved faster than Shinohara could follow, and struck the investigator hard enough to leave him unconscious. The smell of the Arata armor overwhelmed Kaneki's remaining control. He began biting into it. Amon and Akira arrived to find the eye patch feeding upon the armor covering Shinohara's body. Amon attacked immediately. He demanded to know why Kaneki had spared him during their earlier battle after Mado's death. Amon had spent months wondering why a ghoul strong enough to kill him had chosen to let him live. Kaneki could not give him a clear answer. The centipede Kakuja twisted his thoughts, while Cochlea's RC-suppressing gas weakened his regeneration. Amon cut through both the Kagune and the incomplete armor surrounding Kaneki. Kaneki collapsed to his knees. Amon looked down at him and declared that the eye patch was no different from any other ghoul. The words reached the part of Kaneki still struggling beneath the Kakuja. He began to cry. He admitted that he did not want to eat anymore. Before Amon could capture him, Eto swept through the chamber, lifted Kaneki away, and escaped with him as Aogiri withdrew from Cochlea. The raid ended, but Kaneki's battle with his own body continued. Several weeks later, he sat inside Aogiri's hideout and attempted to drink coffee. The cup slipped from his hand. His centipede Kakuja erupted without warning. Kaneki screamed as the armored Kagune wrapped itself around him. The voices of Rize and Yamori returned inside his mind, mixing hunger with memories of torture. He struggled until the Kakuja finally withdrew. Exhausted, Kaneki collapsed upon the floor. He had believed that he was consuming other ghouls to make himself stronger. Now he understood that the hunger was consuming him. Tsukiyama became increasingly alarmed by Kaneki's condition. He went to Anteku and told Yoshimura that Kaneki had repeatedly practiced cannibalism and was developing into a Kakuja. Hinami overheard enough to understand that her older brother was in danger. Kaneki eventually returned to Anteku alone. He did not come back to stay. He asked Yoshimura about the one-eyed owl and the organization surrounding it. Yoshimura answered by revealing a painful piece of his own past. Before he became the gentle manager of Anteku, Yoshimura had lived under the name Kuzen. He had killed for a hidden organization until he met a human woman named Ukina. They fell in love. Together, they had a child born between the human and ghoul worlds. That child was connected to the one-eyed owl. Yoshimura had spent years carrying the guilt of losing both Ukina and their daughter. Anteku became his attempt to give other lonely ghouls the refuge he had been unable to provide for his own family. When Kaneki left the cafe, Toka confronted him outside. She demanded to know why he had abandoned Anteku, only to return whenever he wanted answers. Kaneki tried to explain that everything he had done was meant to protect them. Toka struck him. She knocked him to the ground and demanded to know why protecting everyone required him to destroy himself. Kaneki had no answer. Toka told him not to return to Anteku. Then she walked away, leaving Kaneki alone with the distance he had created between himself and his home. Inside the CCG, the investigation into the owl continued. The evidence eventually pointed toward the 20th ward and the quiet cafe where so many ghouls had found shelter. The order was given to begin a full extermination operation. Its target was Anteku. The CCG's assault upon Anteku transformed the 20th ward into a battlefield. The quiet streets surrounding the cafe filled with investigators, armored vehicles, and the sharp light of search lamps. The place that had once offered shelter to frightened ghouls was now surrounded by an army prepared to destroy it. Yoshimura remained behind to face them. Koma and Irimi also returned to the identities they had carried before finding peace at Anteku. Koma once again became the devil ape, while Irimi wore the mask of the black dog. Both fought to protect the people escaping behind them, and to repay the manager who had given them another way to live. Kaneki could not remain away. Although he had once left Anteku believing that distance would keep everyone safe, the sight of the cafe under attack finally exposed the failure of that choice. The people he loved were fighting without him, and the home he had tried to protect was burning. He entered the operation zone and reached Koma and Irimi after both had been overwhelmed by investigators. Kaneki rescued them before continuing toward Anteku. Every step brought him deeper into the violence surrounding the cafe, but he refused to turn back. Elsewhere, Seidu Takizawa struggled through the battlefield. He had entered the operation as a young CCG investigator, still burdened by fear, insecurity, and the desire to prove that he belonged beside more accomplished officers. The scale of the battle had quickly become more terrible than anything he had imagined. Takizawa encountered Tatara and Noro of Aogiri Tree. Tatara demanded to know where investigator Hoji was located. The question carried a personal hatred rooted in battles that had taken place long before Takizawa understood the history between them. Takizawa was terrified. Even so, he refused to betray Hoji. His resistance did not save him. Tatara lifted him and threw him toward Noro. The silent ghoul's kagune closed around Takizawa, tearing into his body before he disappeared from the battlefield. From a short distance away, Hide witnessed the attack. He had entered the operation while serving as an assistant within the CCG, but his true purpose was always connected to Kaneki. He had followed information about the eye patch for months, quietly searching for the friend who had vanished from his ordinary life. Hide was injured somewhere amid the operation's chaos. The anime leaves the exact cause of his later facial wounds unclear, but he continued toward the one place where he believed Kaneki might eventually return: Anteku. Kaneki's path was blocked by Kotaro Amon. The two had met several times as enemies, yet neither could view the other as a simple monster. Kaneki had seen Amon's determination to protect human lives, while Amon had witnessed the eye patch fight to protect ghouls and humans alike. Kaneki told him that he did not wish to fight. He believed they might have understood one another under different circumstances. Amon admitted that the thought was impossible while they continued standing on opposite sides of the CCG's war. They fought. Amon's Quinke and Kaneki's Kagune collided amid the ruined streets. Both were badly wounded before the battle ended, leaving Amon fallen and Kaneki struggling toward Anteku. Nearby, Yoshimura had already been defeated. The old manager lay broken after facing the CCG's strongest forces. For a brief moment, he imagined Ukina waiting for him and reached toward the memory of the woman he had once loved. Then the true one-eyed owl descended upon the battlefield. The creature attacked the investigators, overwhelmed Juzo, and fought Kisho Arima. After retrieving Yoshimura's body, the owl escaped and later revealed its human form. The one-eyed owl was Eto. The novelist known as Sen Takatsuki was also Yoshimura's daughter, the child he had spent years protecting from a distance. Kaneki did not witness the entire revelation. He continued through the snow until he reached the remains of Anteku. Inside the damaged cafe, he found Hide waiting for him. For a moment, the battlefield seemed far away. They sat together as they once had before Rize, Aogiri, and the ghoul world changed Kaneki's life. Hide spoke with the same gentle familiarity that had always made Kaneki feel less alone. Then, Hide revealed the truth. He had known that Kaneki was a ghoul. He had suspected it since the night Nishiki attacked them, and continued putting the pieces together after Kaneki disappeared. He knew about the eye patch, the CCG investigations, and the secret Kaneki had tried so desperately to hide. Hide did not reject him. He was only saddened that Kaneki had stopped trusting him enough to remain by his side. Kaneki had spent so long believing that the truth would destroy their friendship. Instead, Hide accepted him without hesitation, just as he had accepted the quiet and lonely boy Kaneki had once been. Hide's strength began to fail. The wounds beneath his clothing had taken too much blood. His voice weakened, and his body collapsed before Kaneki could keep him awake. Kaneki lifted his friend into his arms. Outside, Toka reached the burning remains of Anteku. She had tried to enter the battle despite Yomo's orders, driven by the hope that the people she loved might still be alive. Through the falling snow, she saw Kaneki. He emerged from the cafe carrying Hide. Kaneki walked slowly across the battlefield. He passed fallen investigators, abandoned weapons, and the ruins of the place where he had first learned that ghouls could possess kindness. Hide remained motionless in his arms. Toka watched without calling out. Kaneki continued toward the CCG lines, no longer hiding behind his mask. At the end of his path stood Kisho Arima. The undefeated investigator waited beneath the pale light, holding his quinqué while Kaneki approached with Hide in his arms. Kaneki stopped before him. The anime did not show the battle or fully explain what happened after that meeting. It left Kaneki's fate, Hide's survival, and the actions of the CCG unseen. Sometime later, Toka opened another cafe. She called it Rei. And when the story resumed 2 years after the fall of Anteku, Ken Kaneki appeared to be gone. In his place stood a CCG investigator named Heisei Sasaki. 2 years passed after the night Anteku fell, and the name Ken Kaneki seemed to disappear beneath the snow. In his place stood Heisei Sasaki, a soft-spoken investigator serving the Commission of Counter-Ghoul. He wore the CCG's pale uniform, carried a quinqué, and spoke of ghouls as the enemies he had been trained to hunt. Yet whenever silence settled around him, fragments of another life stirred at the edges of his mind. A burning cafe, a boy with a bright smile, and a white-haired figure whose face Heisei could never clearly see. Those memories brought pains so severe that he had learned not to reach for them. Heisei served beneath Akira Mato, who had become a respected investigator since the loss of her father and Amon. She treated him with professional severity, correcting his reports and reminding him not to allow sympathy to interfere with his work. Above them both stood Kisho Arima, the legendary investigator whom Heisei regarded with a mixture of admiration, fear, and almost childlike trust. Arima had guided him through the empty years following his forgotten past, teaching him how to fight and offering him a place within the CCG. To Heisei, Akira and Arima had become something resembling a family, though a quiet part of him still wondered what family he might have lost before meeting them. Heisei was assigned to lead the Quink Squad, a small experimental unit whose members had been implanted with Ghoul Kakuho. Unlike natural ghouls, the Quinks remained human and could eat ordinary food, but they possessed kagunes that could be released in battle. Kuki Urie was ambitious and severe, determined to earn promotions and prove himself stronger than the others. Ginshi Shirazu was loud, reckless, and burdened by a desperate need for money. Toru Mutsuki was timid but diligent, often doubting his own courage. Saiko Yonebayashi preferred games, snacks, and sleep to training, leaving Heisei to drag her gently from her room whenever duty called. Their shared home was often more chaotic than any battlefield. Heisei prepared meals, cleaned after them, reminded them of appointments, and worried over every injury as though he were raising a group of unruly younger siblings. Shirazu complained, but usually listened. Mutsuki tried earnestly to help. Saiko called him Maman and hid beneath blankets whenever responsibility approached. Urie kept his distance, believing Heisei's kindness made him weak. Yet even Urie could see that their mentor never treated them as experiments or weapons. Heisei wanted the Quinks to become investigators, but more importantly, he wanted them to survive as people. Their first major investigation concerned a ghoul known as Torso, who preyed upon women and left only parts of their bodies behind. The case led the Quinks into the unsettled streets of the wards, where ghouls concealed themselves beneath ordinary faces. Mutsuki became especially important to the search, though the disturbing details of the murders awakened a fear he struggled to explain. Heisei encouraged him without force, assuring Mutsuki that courage did not mean moving without fear. It meant continuing while someone trustworthy walked beside him. During the investigation, the squad encountered a masked ghoul called Serpent. His movements were swift and familiar, and he easily overpowered Urie and Shirazu when they rushed ahead without waiting for Heisei. Heisei entered the battle to protect them, releasing his own Kagune. Unlike those of the Quinks, it emerged with the power of a true ghoul. 4 crimson tendrils unfolding from his back with a shape that had once belonged to Rise Kamashiro. The sight frightened his own squad, but it frightened Heisei even more. He could use the power, yet he did not understand where it had come from or why it felt like remembering how to move a limb he had forgotten. Serpent's mask broke during their fight, revealing Nishiki Nishio beneath it. Nishiki stared at Heisei with disbelief before calling him by another name, Kaneki. The word passed through Heisei like a blade. Images flooded his mind too quickly to understand. Anteku's warm lights, Toka's angry eyes, Hinami beside a book, Yamori's chamber, and Hide resting in his arms. Then another voice rose from somewhere deep within him. It belonged to the white-haired boy who waited behind his memories, telling Heisei that the life he was living had been built upon the ruins of someone else. Heisei lost control for a moment, and the power within him surged with terrifying hunger. Nishiki escaped while the Quinks watched their mentor struggle against an enemy none of them could see. Heisei eventually forced the voice back into silence, but afterward he could no longer pretend that his missing past was empty. Someone named Kaneki had once possessed his face, his Kagune, and the memories that made him weep without knowing why. That night, Heisei returned to the Quinks' home and prepared dinner as usual, listening to their complaints and laughter around the table. He smiled gently for them, but in the quiet behind his smile, Kaneki's name continued to echo. Life at the Quinks' house slowly settled into a strange but comforting rhythm. Heis Sasaki woke before the others, prepared breakfast, and tried to gather his scattered team before their assignments began. Shirazu complained loudly while eating everything placed in front of him. Mutsuki apologized whenever anyone else caused trouble. Saiko remained wrapped in blankets until Heis threatened to switch off her games, and Urie usually left before the meal was finished, determined to advance faster than everyone around him. Their arguments filled the rooms with noise, yet Heis treasured them. The Quinks gave him people to care for, and caring for them helped quiet the memories gathering behind the name Kaneki. The CCG's attention soon shifted toward a ghoul called Nutcracker, whose victims were discovered with terrible injuries and missing parts. She moved through Tokyo's wealthier districts, searching for men who could be sold into a hidden market. To uncover her movements, the investigators followed rumors through clubs and fashionable streets where danger concealed itself beneath music and bright lights. Shirazu threw himself into the work, eager to prove that he deserved to lead the squad, while Urie quietly resented him for receiving the position he believed should have been his. Heis watched the rivalry with concern, knowing that ambition could sharpen an investigator, but could also leave them blind to the people standing beside them. Mutsuki was chosen for an undercover role because of his slight appearance and gentle manner. Though frightened by the assignment, he allowed the others to dress him for the part, and endured their teasing with a nervous smile. Haste treated his fear seriously, reminding him that retreating from danger was not shameful if the situation became too much. Mutsuki promised to continue. He wanted to become someone capable of protecting others, even though his hands still trembled whenever memories from his own hidden past approached too closely. During their search, Hayes followed a quiet street into the 20th ward. Something about the neighborhood made his steps slow. He could not remember walking there before, yet every corner seemed to carry the faint shape of familiarity. Then he noticed a small cafe with a simple sign above its entrance. Its name was Ray. Drawn by an impulse he could not explain, Hayes opened the door and entered beneath the soft ringing of a bell. The woman behind the counter was Toka Kirishima. Time had softened some of the sharpness in her expression, but her eyes recognized him immediately. Before her stood the friend who had once worked beside her at Anteku, the young man she had fought to rescue, and the white-haired ghoul who had walked away from her beneath the city lights. Yet Hayes looked at her with the polite uncertainty of a stranger. He introduced himself, unaware that the name he offered was not the one she remembered. Toka concealed the pain of recognition and welcomed him as she would any customer. Renji Yomo watched silently from elsewhere in the cafe, his calm face revealing little. Hinami had also heard that Kaneki might still be alive within the CCG, and from a distance, she longed to see the person who had once helped her read through her grief. None of them approached Heise with the truth. They understood that the investigators had taken his memories and built another life around him. Forcing that life apart might bring Kaneki back, but it might also destroy the gentle person now sitting alone at Toka's counter. Toka prepared a cup of coffee and placed it before him. Heise lifted it carefully, expecting nothing more than a brief rest from the investigation. The first taste awakened something words could not reach. He remembered no clear face or conversation, but warmth spread through him with the ache of returning to a home he had forgotten. Tears slipped down his cheeks before he understood that he was crying. Embarrassed, he apologized and tried to laugh, saying that the coffee must simply have been unusually good. Toka smiled faintly, holding back her own emotion as she told him that he could return whenever he wished. Elsewhere, another person from Kaneki's former life received proof that he had survived. Shu Tsukiyama had spent the years after Kaneki's disappearance wasting away inside his family's estate, refusing food and sinking beneath grief that even his servants could not relieve. Kanae von Roswald and Matsumae watched helplessly as the once theatrical gourmet became little more than a shadow in a darkened room. Then the photographer Chie Hori brought them an image of Heise Sasaki. Tsukiyama stared at the familiar face, and for the first time in years, life returned to his eyes. At the same moment, Heise left the cafe called Rei, carrying the lingering taste of Toka's coffee, unaware that the people he had forgotten were beginning to gather around him, and that the approaching Ghoul auction would soon pull their separate worlds together again. The trail left by Nutcracker led the CCG beneath Tokyo's bright streets and into a marketplace few humans knew existed. Hidden behind elegant doors, wealthy ghouls gathered to purchase people as though they were rare ornaments or expensive meals. Some wore elaborate masks and fine clothing, concealing their hunger beneath graceful manners. Heise Sasaki understood that entering such a place would require more than strength. The investigators would have to move quietly, allow the auction to begin, and wait until every exit could be sealed. Toru Mutsuki entered the operation disguised as one of Nutcracker's potential victims. Although his voice remained steady during the preparations, Heisei noticed the fear Mutsuki tried to hide. He adjusted the younger investigator's clothing with the same patient care he showed at the Quink's house and reminded him that the squad would remain close. Shirazu offered loud encouragement. Saiko complained about the uncomfortable assignment, and Urie treated the mission as another opportunity to prove himself. Beneath their familiar behavior, however, each understood that Mutsuki would be walking into danger alone. Nutcracker discovered him before the CCG was ready to move. Mutsuki was drugged, carried into the auction, and placed beneath the lights before a gathering of masked buyers. The auctioneer praised him as though he were an object without a name, while ghouls raised their offers from the darkness. Among them sat Torso, whose interest in Mutsuki had already become a quiet obsession. Trapped beneath the gaze of strangers, Mutsuki struggled against memories he had spent years trying to bury. Yet he held on to the certainty that Heisei and the others were searching for him. The CCG's assault began with a sudden crash that shattered the auction's careful elegance. Investigators flooded the building as alarms rang through its chambers. Heisei and the Quinks moved toward Mutsuki, while Juzo Suzuya led his own squad into the heart of the gathering. For Juzo, the auction was not merely another operation. Waiting somewhere inside was Big Madam, the powerful ghoul who had purchased him as a child, dressed him like a doll, and forced him to perform acts of violence for applause. Big Madam greeted Juzo as though he were still the frightened child who had once belonged to her. But Juzo was no longer alone beneath her shadow. The kindness of Shinohara and the bonds he had formed within the CCG had given him something she had never allowed him to possess: a life chosen for himself. As her massive kagune tore through the auction hall, Juzo and his squad fought together. He moved with his familiar, almost playful agility, yet behind every strike rested the pain of years he could never recover. When Big Madam finally fell, Juzo looked upon her without the triumph she might have expected. Her hold over him had ended long before her body struck the ground. Elsewhere, Shirazu confronted Nutcracker. She fought viciously, using the strength she had gained through countless victims, while Shirazu pushed his unstable kagune beyond its limits to protect the squad. He eventually dealt the fatal wound, but the victory brought him little satisfaction. As Nutcracker lay dying, the cruelty fell from her expression, leaving behind only the frightened woman she had been before hunger and desperation consumed her life. Shirazu saw that even someone who had committed terrible acts could carry grief no investigator's report would ever record. The moment remained with him, quietly changing the way he understood the enemies he hunted. The rescue seemed close when another figure descended into the battle. Seidu Takizawa had once been an energetic young investigator who competed with Akira Mado and admired Kotaro Amon. He had been declared dead after the fall of Anteku. Now he stood before Heisei as a one-eyed ghoul, his body altered by Dr. Kano's experiments and his cheerful ambition twisted into madness. Takizawa laughed at the investigators who had failed to save him and attacked Heisei with overwhelming force. Heisei tried to defend his squad, but Takizawa tore through his body and treated his suffering as proof that the CCG's heroes could become monsters as easily as anyone else. From within the auction, Hinami heard Heisei's voice. She had grown older during the years of Kaneki's disappearance, and life among Aogiri Tree had taught her to hide the frightened child she once was. Yet when she saw Heisei beneath Takizawa's attack, she did not see a CCG investigator. She saw the gentle young man who had read beside her at Anteku and remained near her after she lost her mother. Hinami released both of her kagunes and placed herself between them, calling to the older brother she had never forgotten. Her intervention gave Heise time to survive, but it revealed her identity to the CCG. Takizawa withdrew into the chaos, while Hinami allowed herself to be surrounded rather than continue a battle that might force Heise to harm her. As the investigators placed her under arrest, Heise stared at the young ghoul with a sorrow he could not explain. He did not remember their afternoons with open books between them, yet some buried part of him knew that she had once been precious. The auction ended with Mutsuki rescued and the CCG claiming victory. But Heise returned home carrying another fragment of Kaneki's life, and Hinami was taken to the deepest cells of Cochlea for choosing to save him. After the Ghoul auction, Heise Sasaki continued visiting Hinami inside Cochlea. The CCG regarded her as a prisoner awaiting execution, but Heise could not look at her and see only an enemy. He brought her books and sat beyond the bars while she spoke to him with a warmth he could not explain. Hinami never demanded that he remember their days at Onteku. She simply treasured the chance to be near the person she had once regarded as an older brother, even if he now answered to another name. Elsewhere, Shu Tsukiyama slowly returned from the despair that had consumed him since Kaneki disappeared. Chie Hori's photograph of Heise had convinced him that Kaneki was still alive somewhere within the CCG investigator. His strength, appetite, and theatrical manner began to return, filling the Tsukiyama estate with the voice that had been absent for so long. Yet his desire to recover Kaneki was no longer merely the hunger of the gourmet. Kaneki had become someone irreplaceable to him, though Tsukiyama still struggled to understand the depth of that attachment. No one felt that struggle more painfully than Kanae von Roswald. Known within the household as Kanae, but born Karen, she had devoted her entire life to Tsukiyama. He had given her shelter after the destruction of the Roswald family, and her gratitude had deepened into a love she kept hidden behind loyalty. As Tsukiyama's every thought turned toward Kaneki, Karen began to fear that she would never be seen as anything more than a servant standing at the edge of his life. The CCG's investigation into the ghoul group called Rose gradually led Heise and the Quinks toward the Tsukiyama family. The name Rose came from the remnants of the Roswald household, but the investigators soon uncovered evidence connecting its members to the wealthy family that had hidden among humans for generations. Nimura Furuta helped guide the investigation while maintaining his foolish and harmless appearance. Beneath that disguise, he was quietly arranging the destruction of people whose trust he had never deserved. Eto found Karen before the CCG's operation began. The one-eyed owl recognized her loneliness and jealousy, then used both to break her apart. Through cruelty disguised as encouragement, Eto convinced Karen that greater suffering would grant her the strength to reclaim Tsukiyama. Karen emerged from the encounter transformed, her body more powerful, and her thoughts consumed by the fear that Heise had stolen the person she loved. For the Quinks, the approaching operation came during one of their last peaceful seasons together. Shirazu had grown into the responsibility of leading the squad. He still hoped his earnings might help his younger sister, but his reasons for fighting now included the companions gathered around him. Urie remained ambitious, though he was slowly learning to respect the friend he had once considered an obstacle. Mutsuki worked earnestly beside them, and Saiko filled their home with complaints, games, and unexpected affection. Heise prepared food and watched them exchange gifts beneath the Christmas lights. For a little while, he allowed himself to enjoy the family they had become. Yet Ken Kaneki's memories continued pressing against the walls inside him. Hayes feared that remembering would destroy the life he had built, while the forgotten Kaneki seemed increasingly unwilling to remain asleep. The CCG soon launched its full assault against the Tsukiyama estate. Mirumo Tsukiyama ordered his son to escape, willing to surrender everything if Shu could survive. Matsumae and the household retainers remained behind, fighting not merely as servants, but as members of a family that had sheltered one another for years. The elegant estate became a battlefield as investigators entered its halls and the people who had lived there made their final stand. Matsumae confronted Furuta, believing him to be the clumsy investigator he had pretended to be. Furuta abandoned the performance and revealed his true speed and cruelty. He killed Matsumae without hesitation, treating the end of her life as little more than another private joke. Around them, the Tsukiyama household collapsed, and Mirumo allowed himself to be captured while his son fled toward the lunar eclipse building. At the top of the tower, Heisei finally confronted Tsukiyama. The gourmet pleaded with him to remember Anteku and the people who had loved Ken Kaneki. Heisei resisted, because remembering meant facing the suffering from which his new identity had protected him. Before either could reach the other, Karen attacked. Strengthened and distorted by Eto, she fought Heisei with all the jealousy and grief she had carried in silence. The battle forced Heisei into the darkest part of his own mind. Ken Kaneki no longer appeared as a gentle memory asking to be accepted. He emerged as the wounded self Heisei had kept imprisoned, tired of allowing another identity to dream in his place. Heisei recognized that his peaceful life had been built upon memories he was too frightened to confront. When he finally stopped resisting, the balance within him changed. Ken Kaneki awakened. His hair darkened, and the warmth associated with Heisei disappeared behind a cold and distant expression. Kaneki defeated Karen and turned toward Eto when the one-eyed owl entered the battle. Her enormous kakuja filled the rooftop with a monstrous presence, but Kaneki cut through it with terrifying precision. The CCG investigators watching below saw that Heisei Sasaki had become something far more dangerous than the mentor they remembered. Tsukiyama was thrown from the rooftop during the destruction. Karen followed him without hesitation and used her own body to protect him from the fall. As they descended, she finally spoke honestly about the life she had devoted to him. Tsukiyama looked at her and, at last, recognized the person beneath the role of Kanae. He called her Karen. Hearing her true name from him gave her one final moment of happiness before she died saving the man she loved. Elsewhere in the building, the Quinx squad faced Noro. His silent body regenerated from wounds that should have killed any ordinary ghoul, forcing Shirazu, Urie, Mutsuki, and Saiko to fight beyond their limits. Shirazu led them through the terror, refusing to retreat while his friends remained in danger. Together, they discovered Noro's core and struck it with everything they had. Noro was finally defeated, but not before inflicting fatal wounds upon Shirazu. Yuri caught him as his strength faded. The rivalry between them had already become friendship, though neither had known how to say it clearly. Saiko and Mutsuki gathered close while Shirazu struggled to remain awake among the people he had learned to protect. His breathing eventually grew still, leaving the Quinx without their leader and the house they shared without the loud voice that had once filled it. Their grief was made even crueler when Aogiri Tree later stole Shirazu's body. The CCG could not return him to his family or offer his companions the certainty of a peaceful farewell. Yuri carried the loss as another failure, while Saiko and Mutsuki mourned the person who had held their damaged squad together. The operation ended with the Tsukiyama family destroyed, Karen and Shirazu dead, and Shu Tsukiyama left wandering with the memory of everyone who had sacrificed themselves for him. The CCG called the mission a success, but the person who returned from the rooftop was no longer truly Heisei Sasaki. Ken Kaneki had reclaimed his memories, yet he did not return with the gentle heart his former friends remembered. Grief had hardened him into a distant investigator whose black clothing and merciless efficiency would earn him a new name. The Black Reaper had awakened. After the destruction of the Tsukiyama family, the Quink's house no longer carried the same warmth. Shirazu's chair remained empty at the table, and even Saiko's games could not fill the silence he had left behind. Yuri blamed himself for failing to protect the person he had once treated as a rival, while Mutsuki quietly carried grief alongside the darker memories already hidden within him. Heisei Sasaki had once gathered them for meals and worried over every injury. The black-haired investigator who returned from the operation seemed to have buried that tenderness somewhere none of them could reach. Ken Kaneki remembered who he was now, but the return of his memories did not make him whole. Heisei had been a shelter built around unbearable loss, and Kaneki treated that gentler identity as something he no longer deserved. He became colder, more distant, and frighteningly efficient. The CCG promoted him and placed powerful investigators beneath his command, while ghouls began whispering another name for him: the Black Reaper. He moved through battles with Arima's precision and the strength of Rize's Kagune, leaving little room for hesitation or mercy to be mistaken for weakness. The Quinks felt his absence even when he stood beside them. Saiko still called him Mama, hoping the familiar name might bring back the mentor who had cooked for them and dragged her from bed. Kaneki answered her with restrained politeness, then turned away before the affection in her voice could weaken his resolve. Yuri became the squad's center in Shirazu's absence, gradually learning that leadership meant carrying other people rather than climbing above them. Kaneki watched this change from a distance, believing that separating himself from the Quinks would protect them from the fate that followed everyone he loved. There was one bond he could not force himself to abandon. Hinami remained imprisoned in Cochlea, awaiting the day when the CCG would decide she had lived long enough. Kaneki continued visiting her beneath the appearance of an investigator reviewing a prisoner. He brought her books and sat outside her cell, while Hinami spoke to him with the same quiet trust she had offered years earlier at Anteku. She recognized the coldness in his eyes, but also the sorrow beneath it. Kaneki never told her that he remembered everything: the reading lessons, her mother, and the promise contained in simply sitting beside her after loss. Beyond Cochlea, Sen Takatsuki prepared to cast aside the human identity she had worn for years. Before a crowd of readers and reporters, the celebrated novelist revealed that she was Ito, a ghoul, and the true one-eyed owl. The announcement sent fear and disbelief throughout Tokyo. Humans who had treasured her books were forced to confront the fact that the words which moved them had been written by someone they had been taught to consider a monster. Eto presented her final novel, King Beilager, as a story capable of carrying a hidden message beyond the walls dividing the two species. Eto allowed the CCG to arrest her and was taken into Cochlea, where Kaneki questioned her. Their conversation carried the strange familiarity of two one-eyed ghouls who had both lived between worlds, though they had chosen very different paths. Eto spoke of V, the secret organization that had once controlled Yoshimura, and of the Washu family standing at the heart of the CCG. The institution claiming to protect humanity was not as purely human as its investigators believed. Its leaders had built power by controlling the conflict between humans and ghouls, ensuring that the war continued while they remained hidden above it. She also spoke of a king, a figure who could stand before both worlds and break the carefully maintained order. Eto had helped create the legend of the One-Eyed King, but the title was waiting for someone capable of carrying its burden. Kaneki resisted the suggestion. He did not imagine himself leading anyone toward a new future. Beneath the Black Reaper's calm face, he had formed a far more sorrowful plan. Rescue Hinami, complete one final act of kindness, and allow Kisho Arima to end the life that had brought so much suffering. The opportunity arrived when the CCG prepared two great operations at once. Its strongest forces would travel to Rushima Island to destroy Aogiri Tree, while Cochlea remained under Arima's protection. Hinami's execution was ordered, leaving Kaneki no time to delay. As investigators gathered for war and old allies moved secretly toward the prison, Kaneki walked alone through Cochlea's descending corridors. He stopped before Hinami's cell and opened the door. For the first time in years, the coldness left his voice as he looked at the girl who had once called him her older brother. "Hinami," he told her softly, "I have come to save you." The prison known as Cochlea descended deep beneath Tokyo. Layer after layer of reinforced walls, steel gates, and armed guards separated the imprisoned ghouls from the world above. Among those prisoners was Hinami Fueguchi, awaiting execution after willingly surrendering herself to protect Heisei Sasaki. But Heisei no longer controlled the body walking toward her cell. Ken Kaneki had returned. After recovering the memories he had buried beneath the identity created by the CCG, Kaneki entered Cochlea with one purpose. He intended to rescue Hinami as his final act, and then allow himself to die at the hands of Kisho Arima. He believed death would bring an end to the pain he had carried for so long. Kaneki reached Hinami's cell and opened it. For Hinami, the sight of him carried both relief and sorrow. The person standing before her resembled the older brother she remembered from Anteku, but his expression was heavier, marked by years of loss and the knowledge that he did not expect to leave the prison alive. Kaneki told her that they were going home. At the same time, Ayato Kirishima led a separate force into Cochlea. Banjo and his followers joined him as they broke through the prison's defenses, defeating guards and opening cells along their path. Ayato had come for Hinami, refusing to allow the CCG to execute someone who had become precious to him. The prison erupted into chaos. Alarms echoed through the corridors as released ghouls rushed toward the exits. Investigators attempted to contain the escape, but the attack had reached too deeply into Cochlea for the operation to be stopped quickly. Then Kisho Arima arrived. Ayato confronted him in one of the prison corridors. He attacked without hesitation, unleashing his wing-shaped kagune and filling the passage with projectiles. Arima moved through the assault with calm precision, deflecting each strike and advancing as though Ayato's speed meant nothing. Ayato was quickly overwhelmed. Arima prepared to deliver the final blow. Before he could strike, another kagune intercepted his weapon. Renji Yomo had arrived. Tauka stood beside him. She had entered Cochlea to help rescue Hinami and Ayato, knowing that Arima was the investigator responsible for much of the suffering carried by her family. For Yomo, the confrontation was deeply personal. Tauka and Ayato's mother, Hikari, had been his sister. Years earlier, Arima had killed her while carrying out his duties for the CCG. Her husband, Arata, had then pursued strength through cannibalism, hoping to protect his children, only to be hunted down by investigators as well. Yomo had survived those losses and eventually found refuge under Yoshimura at Anteku. Now he stood between Arima and the children of the sister he had been unable to save. Tauka, Ayato, and Yomo attacked together. Their kagunes filled the narrow corridor, striking from different directions in an effort to overcome Arima's defenses. Yet even 3 experienced ghouls struggled against the investigator known as the CCG's undefeated Reaper. Arima remained composed. His Quinque tore through their attacks and forced them backward. Yomo placed himself in front of Tauka and Ayato whenever Arima's strikes came too close, determined that Hikari's children would not die before him. Elsewhere in the prison, Kaneki guided Hinami through the corridors. Their path was blocked by Nimura Furuta. Furuta wore the appearance of an ordinary investigator, but Kaneki had already begun to understand that something far more dangerous existed beneath his playful behavior. Furuta mocked them and drew his weapon, treating the prison break as though it were a private joke. He moved to kill Kaneki. Hinami reacted first. Her kagune erupted around her and pierced directly through Furuta's chest. For a moment, he appeared defeated. Kaneki and Hinami continued onward, unaware that Furuta's role in their lives was only beginning. The investigator they left behind possessed secrets connected to Rize, the Washu family, and the hidden organization controlling both ghouls and the CCG. They reached the corridor where Arima was fighting Tauka, Ayato, and Yomo. Yomo had been driven to the ground. Arima raised his Quinque to finish him. Kaneki arrived just in time. His kagane struck Arima's weapon aside and placed him between the investigator and his old friends. Tuka stared at him. The person before her was no longer Heisei Sasaki. The white hair, the familiar kagune, and the expression in his eyes belonged to the Kaneki she had waited years to see again. There was no time for a reunion. Kaneki ordered Tuka, Ayato, Yomo, and Hinami to continue toward the exit. Banjo and the other escaping ghouls were already moving through the lower levels, and every moment spent near Arima placed them in greater danger. Tuka refused to leave him. She understood what Kaneki intended. Once again, he planned to protect everyone by remaining behind alone. Once again, he had decided that his own life was something he could sacrifice without asking those who loved him. Kaneki did not allow the argument to continue. He promised that he would follow them. But the quiet sadness in his voice revealed the truth. Kaneki attacked Arima, forcing the investigator away from the others. Their battle carried them through the collapsing prison until both fell into the lowest chamber of Cochlea. They landed among countless white flowers. Above them, Tuka and the others continued their escape with Hinami. Below, Kaneki stood alone before the man who had defeated him years earlier and erased the life he once knew. Arima raised his Quinque. Kaneki summoned his Kagune. He had entered Cochlea intending to die, but before the battle ended, a memory of Hide would remind him that living required greater courage than surrender. At the lowest level of Cochlea, Ken Kaneki faced Kisho Arima among a field of pale flowers. Far above them, Toka, Hinami, Ayato, Yomo, and the other escaping ghouls continued toward freedom. Kaneki had remained behind to prevent Arima from following them. He had promised that he would return. But deep inside, Kaneki still believed he had entered Cochlea to die. Arima advanced without hesitation. He carried a Quinque created from the one-eyed owl, a weapon powerful enough to tear through Kaneki's defenses with terrifying ease. Every movement was precise, calm, and almost impossible to predict. Kaneki released his Kagune and attacked. The flower-covered chamber erupted around them. Crimson limbs struck through the air while Arima moved between them, cutting each attack apart before it could reach him. Kaneki transformed further. His kakuja surrounded his body like dark armor, giving form to the pain and hunger he had carried through years of violence. Yet even this strength did not place him beyond Arima. The investigator pierced him again and again. Kaneki's body healed, only to be torn open once more. Arima told him that he had already been given many opportunities to die. He called Kaneki weak and forced him to confront the truth behind his decision to remain in Cochlea. Kaneki had not been fighting to escape. He had been searching for a beautiful death. He imagined that sacrificing himself for Hinami and the others would finally give meaning to all the suffering he had caused and endured. As his strength faded, the white flowers around him darkened. Kaneki's mind slipped away from the battlefield. He found himself sitting beside Hide. The friend he believed he had lost appeared as he had in their younger days, warm and familiar, without anger or judgment. Hide listened as Kaneki admitted that he was tired. Kaneki confessed that he wanted to disappear. Hide would not allow him to surrender. He reminded Kaneki that living was not something he could do only when life felt simple or painless. Kaneki could not continue choosing death and calling it protection. The people waiting for him did not need a sacrifice. They needed him to return. For the first time, Kaneki admitted what he truly wanted. He wanted to live. His consciousness returned to Cochlea. Kaneki rose once more, his hair turning white as his determination changed. The battle was no longer a funeral he had prepared for himself. It was a path back to the people he loved. Arima attacked. Kaneki moved toward the weapon instead of away from it. He allowed the quinquet to strike close enough for him to reach its center. Then, he shattered it. The undefeated investigator stood, holding the broken remains of his weapon. For the first time in his career, Kisho Arima had lost. He told Kaneki to finish the battle and kill him. Kaneki refused. He had spent too much of his life believing that strength existed only to destroy others. Defeating Arima did not require taking his life. Kaneki declared that the fight was over. Arima looked at him in silence. Then, using the broken edge of his own quinquet, he cut his throat. Kaneki caught him as he fell. The man once feared as the CCG's Reaper now appeared strangely human and fragile in Kaneki's arms. Blood spread across the pale flowers as Arima began revealing the truth he had hidden throughout his life. Arima had been raised in the sunlit garden. He was one of the children born from the hidden breeding program controlled by the Washu family. Though he possessed extraordinary speed, strength, and senses, he was not a true ghoul. He was a half-human. People like Arima aged quickly and lived shortened lives. His body had already begun failing him, and the vision in one of his eyes was disappearing. The undefeated Reaper had always known that death was approaching. Arima explained that his life had never truly belonged to him. The CCG had shaped him into a weapon and ordered him to kill ghouls from childhood onward. Every victory increased the legend surrounding his name, but every life he took deepened his hatred for the system that had created him. Arima and Ito had built the legend of the One-Eyed King together. Arima himself had served as the Hidden King, waiting for a successor powerful enough to defeat him, unite the ghouls, and challenge the Washu family's rule. When Kaneki survived their first confrontation and became Heisei Sasaki, Arima watched him closely. He trained him, protected him within the CCG, and waited for him to grow strong enough to make his own choice. Now Kaneki had defeated him. Arima asked him to tell everyone that he had killed the CCG's Reaper. That story would transform Kaneki into the figure Arima and Ito had prepared, the new one-eyed king. Kaneki struggled to accept the burden. He had never wanted to become a ruler or a legend. He had only wanted a place where the people he loved could live safely. But perhaps that simple wish was exactly why Arima had chosen him. Arima's breathing weakened. For most of his life, he had left death behind wherever he went. Now, for the first time, he believed he was leaving something else behind. He was leaving Kaneki. Arima died quietly in his arms. Kaneki remained among the flowers, grieving for the man who had been his enemy, his captor, his mentor, and something close to a father during his years as Heisei. Above him, the world controlled by the CCG was beginning to fracture. Kaneki had entered Cochlea intending to die. He emerged carrying the final wish of the undefeated Reaper. Soon, he would stand before the surviving ghouls and accept the title prepared for him. Ken Kaneki would become the One-Eyed King. Ken Kaneki awakened inside the coffee shop called Rei. For a few quiet moments he did not move. The final images of Cochlea remained clear in his mind. The field of pale flowers, Arima's broken quinque, and the blood spreading beneath the man Kaneki had once feared as the CCG's undefeated Reaper. Arima was gone, but his final wish remained. Tolka stood nearby and welcomed Kaneki back. There were many things neither of them knew how to say. Kaneki had disappeared from her life, returned as Heisei Sasaki, recovered his memories, and then nearly sacrificed himself again. Yet Tolka did not demand an explanation immediately. For the moment, it was enough that he had returned alive. The survivors of Cochlea gathered within a hidden facility belonging to the Tsukiyama family. Former members of Anteku stood beside refugees from Aogiri Tree. Hinami, Ayato, Yomo, Nishiki, Tsukiyama, Banjo, and many others waited to hear what Kaneki intended to do. Takehirako also arrived with the remaining members of Arima's Zero Squad. Before dying, Arima had instructed them to protect Kaneki. Now humans raised by the CCG stood beside the very ghouls they had once been trained to hunt. Kaneki faced the gathering. He told them the truth about Arima and Eto. The One-Eyed King had been a hidden symbol built around Arima's role and the successor he and Eto hoped to create. The title was meant to challenge the Washu family and bring together those who wished to change the world. Now the title had passed to Kaneki. He did not accept it because he desired power. Kaneki had never wanted a throne, an army, or followers who obeyed him without question. He wanted to build a world where ghouls would no longer need to hide in fear, and where humans would not need to lose their families to survive. He announced the creation of a new organization. Its name would be Goat. Unlike Aogiri Tree, Goat would not seek change through indiscriminate destruction. Kaneki wanted to oppose the hidden rulers of the CCG, while also opening a path toward communication with human society. Some members of the gathering remained uncertain. Kurona had followed her own path for too long to place herself beneath another leader. Several members of the White Suits also refused Kaneki's offer and prepared to leave. Kaneki did not force them to remain. The world he wanted to create could not begin with chains. Naki confronted him before the meeting ended. He had finally learned that Kaneki was responsible for defeating Yamori, the ghoul Naki had loved and followed as his older brother. To Naki, Yamori had provided strength, protection, and a place within Aogiri. He demanded a fight. Kaneki accepted. Their confrontation was brief. Naki attacked with grief and fury, but Kaneki defeated him without killing or humiliating him. Kaneki acknowledged what Yamori had meant to Naki. He could not forgive the torture Yamori had inflicted upon him, but he understood that the same person could exist differently within another person's memories. Naki began to cry. Then he agreed to join Goat. The scattered survivors of Aogiri now had somewhere else to go. Kaneki also met Hisashi Ogura, the human ghoul researcher who represented an organization called the Great Wheel Act. Its members believed that humans and ghouls should be able to understand one another rather than remaining trapped in endless war. For the first time, ordinary humans willingly offered their assistance to a ghoul organization. The alliance was small and fragile, but it proved that coexistence was not merely an impossible dream. Elsewhere within the refuge, Akira Mado remained badly injured. Takizawa had protected her during the fighting on Rushima, and Banjo used his healing Kagune to keep her alive. Even with his help, her condition required medical treatment beyond what the ghouls could provide. Nico appeared and explained that Akira needed a real doctor. Through the connections surrounding Goat, they found a way to treat her. When Akira awakened, she found herself surrounded by people she had once considered enemies. Amon visited her. He had survived the Anteku operation and the experiments that transformed him into an artificial one-eyed ghoul. The former investigator now stood between the two worlds, just as Kaneki did. Amon had lost the ordinary human life he once understood, but he had not lost the part of himself that cared for Akira. Later, Touka took Akira outside. The two women walked together beneath the open sky, carrying a history neither could easily escape. Touka revealed that she had killed Akira's father, Kureo Mado. Mado had hunted Hinami and her mother after turning the Kagune of Hinami's father into a weapon. When he prepared to kill Hinami, Touka had intervened and ended his life. Akira listened in silence. To her, Kureo Mado had been a loving father whose death shaped everything that followed. To Touka and Hinami, he had been an investigator who hunted their family without mercy. Neither version erased the other. Hinami eventually approached Akira. Her parents had been killed by Mado and Amon, while Akira had lost her father because Touka protected Hinami. The two carried grief created by the same cycle of violence. For a long moment, neither knew what forgiveness should look like. Then Hinami embraced her. Akira began to cry. The embrace did not restore the dead or remove the pain between them. It simply allowed both women to stop carrying their hatred alone. While Goat struggled to build something new, the CCG entered a far darker era. The Washu family had been slaughtered. Nimura Furuta stepped into the emptiness they left behind and presented himself as the new leader of both the Washu clan and the Commission of Counter-Ghoul. The smiling investigator Kaneki had encountered in Cochlea now controlled the organization responsible for hunting ghouls across Tokyo. Furuta declared that the CCG would become stronger and more ruthless. He began by directing the investigators against the clowns, whose attacks erupted across several wards at once. Many of the figures sent into battle were ordinary humans wearing masks and being forced to fight. Juzo Suzuya confronted Uta. Kuki Urie battled Donato Porpora, the ghoul who had raised Amon inside an orphanage while secretly feeding upon the children there. Donato's Kagune overwhelmed Urie and pushed him into a violent loss of control. Saiko Yonebayashi refused to abandon him. She endured his attacks and reached through his rage until Urie finally recognized her. The clown assault was repelled, but Furuta had used the chaos to strengthen his control. Before the assembled investigators, he introduced a new force known as the Ogai. They were children transformed into artificial ghouls and trained to obey the CCG without hesitation. Their leader was Hajime Hazuki, a boy whose family had died during one of the Ghoul attacks connected to Kaneki's past. Furuta presented the Ogai as the future of Ghoul extermination. To the investigators, they appeared to be young heroes capable of ending the war. To Furuta, they were disposable weapons. Kaneki looked upon Goat and understood the weight of the title he had accepted. He now had followers to protect, alliances to preserve, and a fragile hope that could be destroyed by a single mistake. Across Tokyo, Furuta prepared the CCG for a campaign unlike any it had attempted before. The one-eyed king had finally appeared, and the new leader of the CCG was preparing to hunt down every ghoul who gathered beneath his name. Under Nomura Furuta's command, the CCG's persecution of ghouls became more severe than ever. The Ogai moved through Tokyo with frightening speed, hunting anyone identified as a ghoul. Their youthful faces concealed the artificial power placed inside them, and their victories were praised as proof that Furuta's methods were working. Kaneki and members of Goat continued trying to rescue those caught in the raids, but they could not reach everyone. One evening, Kaneki, Nishiki, and Tsukiyama arrived too late to save a group of ghouls who had been surrounded by investigators. The bodies left behind reminded Kaneki that becoming the one-eyed king had not given him the ability to protect every life. He carried each failure quietly. Kaneki still believed that a leader should bear every burden alone, even though the people around him had repeatedly asked to share that weight. During a brief return to the cafe, Toka confronted him. She had watched Kaneki disappear into danger again and again, always deciding for himself that protecting others required leaving them behind. Toka told him that he needed to trust the people who cared for him. Then, with characteristic directness, she revealed that her feelings for him had never disappeared. Kaneki was left speechless. Before their conversation could continue, Toru Mutsuki entered the cafe. Mutsuki's devotion to Heisei Sasaki had become twisted by jealousy, trauma, and desperation. Unable to accept that the mentor he loved had chosen another life, Mutsuki demanded that Kaneki return to the CCG. Kaneki refused. Mutsuki attacked. The peaceful cafe became a battlefield as blades and kagune tore through the room. Toka fought beside Kaneki, and together they escaped before Mutsuki could force him back into the identity of Heisei. They found shelter inside an abandoned building. For the first time since Kaneki's return, there were no followers waiting for orders, no investigators pursuing them through the halls, and no titles standing between them. There was only Ken and Toka. Toka reached for him. Kaneki had spent most of his life believing that love would eventually be taken away. His father had died when he was young. His mother had worked herself to death. Hide had disappeared. Anteku had fallen. And every home Kaneki found seemed destined to burn. That night, he allowed himself to stop running. Kaneki and Toka shared a private moment of tenderness, giving each other the trust they had struggled for years to express. Their memories passed quietly between them. The books they once read at Anteku, the battles that separated them, and the many times each had waited for the other to return. Kaneki began to cry. Toka cried with him. Neither could promise that the world outside would become safe. They could only promise that they would face it together. Elsewhere, Takeomi Kuroiwa married Yoriko Kosaka. Toka could not attend her closest human friend's wedding, but Yoriko continued thinking of her. Their friendship had survived secrets, disappearances, and the discovery that Toka belonged to the world the CCG had taught humans to fear. Furuta learned of their connection. Yoriko was arrested for associating with a ghoul, demonstrating that Furuta was now willing to punish ordinary humans simply for caring about someone on the opposite side of the war. When Kaneki and Toka returned to Goat, Nishiki noticed a change in her condition. He quietly suggested to Kaneki that Toka might be pregnant. Kaneki approached her in disbelief. Toka confirmed it. For a moment, the war surrounding them seemed to disappear. Kaneki had spent years questioning whether someone like him deserved to live. Yet now, another life had begun because he and Toka had chosen each other. They decided to marry. The ghouls gathered within the underground refuge for a simple ceremony. According to an old ghoul custom, Kaneki and Toka bit one another deeply enough to leave scars that would remain even after their bodies healed. The marks declared that they had chosen each other for life. Their friends celebrated around them. Hinami smiled for the two people who had once become her older brother and sister. Nishiki, Tsukiyama, Yomo, Ayato, Banjo, Naki, and the other members of Goat shared the rare moment of happiness. Kaneki had never imagined himself surrounded by such a family, but the celebration took place beneath a city preparing to destroy them. Inside CCG headquarters, Kuki Yuri and Iwao Kuroiwa decided that Furuta's behavior could no longer be ignored. His executions, false reports, and increasingly irrational commands had placed both civilians and investigators in danger. They entered the director's office, intending to confront him. Instead, violence erupted as Furuta's allies revealed themselves. Yuri fought through the attack while the corruption inside the CCG finally became impossible to ignore. Itsuki Marude appeared with investigators who had discovered the conspiracy hidden inside the organization. With him was the masked figure known as Scarecrow. Scarecrow was Hideyoshi Nagachika. Hide had survived the fall of Anteku. Though his injuries had left him scarred and damaged his ability to speak normally, he had continued working from the shadows. He now asked Yuri to help expose Furuta and save both humans and ghouls from the disaster the new director was creating. But Furuta had already begun his largest operation. The CCG discovered Goat's refuge in the 24th Ward. Investigators and Ogai descended into the underground city while Kaneki and Toka's wedding celebration was still fresh in everyone's minds. The refuge erupted into chaos. Toka ordered the non-combatants to retreat deeper into the tunnels. She remained behind with the others, determined to protect the people fleeing around her and the child growing inside her. Mutsuki found her. Still consumed by the belief that Toka had stolen Kaneki away, Mutsuki attacked her with murderous desperation. Elsewhere, Goat's fighters confronted Juzo Suzuya's squad and the other CCG forces flooding the tunnels. Juzo had once known Heise as a fellow investigator. Now, he had been sent to eliminate the man who had become the One-Eyed King. Kaneki fought the Ogai. The young artificial ghouls surrounded him in overwhelming numbers. Each possessed power created through the same kind of experimentation that had once transformed Kaneki. Kaneki tried to reach Toka. He sensed that she was in danger and pushed himself beyond exhaustion, refusing to lose the family he had only just begun to accept. But the Ogai tore through him. His limbs were severed, his body broken, and his strength reduced faster than he could regenerate it. Kaneki fell beneath the children Furuta had created to destroy him. Inside his mind, Kaneki confronted the many identities he had carried. The frightened university student, the tortured prisoner, the white-haired ghoul, Heise Sasaki, the Black Reaper, the One-Eyed King. Each version had been born from Kaneki's attempt to survive another loss, yet none had freed him from his deepest fear: that everyone he loved would disappear while he remained powerless to stop it. He thought of Toka. He thought of their unborn child. Kaneki no longer desired a beautiful death. He wanted to return home. his hunger awakened. Kaneki consumed the artificial Kagune power surrounding him, taking the Ogai into himself so that his body could continue moving. The result was greater than anything Furuta's enemies had imagined. A colossal mass of Kagune erupted from beneath the 24th ward. It tore through the underground city, swallowed investigators and ghouls alike, and burst upward through the streets of Tokyo. Buildings shattered as enormous red limbs spread across the city. Toka and Mutsuki looked upward in horror. The creature continued expanding. It was not a form Kaneki had chosen or one he could control. His desperate wish to survive had been transformed by Furuta's plan into a catastrophe large enough to consume Tokyo. The one-eyed king disappeared within it. Kaneki had become Dragon. Dragon stretched across Tokyo like an enormous wound. Its crimson body had torn through streets, buildings, and underground tunnels, leaving entire sections of the city buried beneath flesh and rubble. Humans and ghouls had both been caught within the destruction. At the center of it all was Ken Kaneki. He had wanted only to survive long enough to return to Toka and their unborn child. Instead, his desperate hunger had transformed him into the very disaster Furuta intended to create. Tokyo looked upon Dragon and saw a monster. Hide saw his friend. After years of working beneath the mask of Scarecrow, Hide finally stepped forward openly. The attack upon Tokyo had made the old division between humans and ghouls meaningless. Dragon threatened everyone, regardless of which side they had once occupied. Hide approached the remaining CCG investigators with a proposal. They would work with Goat. Many investigators resisted the idea. They had spent their lives hunting ghouls and had lost friends and family to them. The surviving ghouls carried the same grief toward the CCG. But there was no other way to save the city. Kukiyuri, Juzo Suzuya, Itsuki Marude, and the investigators who had turned against Furuta agreed to cooperate. Toka, Tsukiyama, Nishiki, Hinami, Yomo, and the members of Goat stood beside them. Former enemies entered the same command center. Human researchers studied Dragon's structure, while ghouls used their senses and knowledge of Kagune to understand the creature. For the first time, the two worlds worked together not because either side had been defeated, but because both had chosen to protect the same city. Toka refused to believe that Kaneki was gone. Before their wedding, she had given him a ring that once belonged to her parents. The metal remained somewhere inside Dragon, still attached to the man buried beneath its enormous body. The rescue teams used detectors to search for it. Through twisting tunnels of Kagune, they followed the faint signal deeper into Dragon. Members of Goat and the CCG removed layer after layer while the creature shifted around them. Inside, Kaneki awakened in a strange and silent place. Rize Kamishiro waited for him. She appeared as she had on the night his life changed, beautiful and frightening, carrying the face of the ghoul whose organs had transformed him. Rize called him a murderer. Dragon had killed humans and ghouls alike. Even if Furuta had arranged the circumstances, Kaneki's body had created the creature that destroyed their homes. Kaneki could not deny it. For most of his life, he had survived suffering by dividing himself into different identities. He blamed his weakness, his hunger, his ghoul nature, or the cruel people who had controlled him. This time, he accepted responsibility. He could not return the lives Dragon had taken. He could only continue living and spend the life that remained trying to repair what he had broken. Kaneki no longer wished for death. He wanted to see Toka. He wanted to meet their child. He wanted to return to Hide and the friends who had continued searching for him even when he believed himself beyond saving. Outside that dreamlike space, the rescue team reached Dragon's center. They found Kaneki's body and pulled him free. Without its original core, dragon began losing its shape. Its enormous limbs weakened and collapsed across Tokyo. Toka waited beside Kaneki until he opened his eyes. She had once watched him walk away because he believed solitude would protect her. Now she had entered the body of a monster to bring him home. Kaneki apologized. Toka did not need another promise that he would carry everything alone. She needed him to stay. Kaneki also reunited with Hide. The lower half of Hide's face bore the scars left by the events surrounding Anteku. His voice had been damaged, but his familiar warmth remained unchanged. Kaneki struggled to look at him. The memories surrounding Hide's injuries were incomplete and painful, but Kaneki knew that his closest friend had suffered while trying to reach him. Hide did not blame him. He had searched for Kaneki, entered the CCG, lived beneath a mask, and helped create the alliance that rescued him for one simple reason. He wanted his friend to live. Their reunion was quiet. After everything that had happened, Hide was still Hide. But the crisis had not ended. From the remains of Dragon emerged twisted creatures known as dragon orphans. They spread through Tokyo, releasing a poison that caused terrible changes in the humans exposed to it. The same force that had united humans and ghouls now threatened to transform the city again. Kimi Nishino and the other researchers searched for a treatment, while CCG investigators and ghouls fought the creatures together. Kaneki joined them. He had only recently escaped Dragon, yet he could not remain behind while the creature born from his body continued hurting others. The investigation revealed another core hidden beneath Tokyo. Kaneki and Ayato descended into the depths to destroy it. Their path led through the remains of Dragon and into the hidden world Furuta had prepared. At the same time, the forces of V attacked the Alliance's headquarters. V had served the Washu family from the shadows for generations, preserving the system that kept humans and ghouls trapped within the same war. Now Goat and the former CCG stood together against them. Tsukiyama, Nishiki, Naki, Miza, Urie, Juzo, Hirako, and their allies fought side by side. Takizawa returned to the battlefield. Corona and the White Suits joined the struggle. Even those who had refused Kaneki's leadership understood that Furuta and V could not be allowed to decide the future of Tokyo. Deep beneath the city, Kaneki found Nimura Furuta. The smiling investigator who had manipulated the CCG, the clowns, Rize, the Ogai, and Dragon now waited for him at the center of the ruin. Furuta revealed the power hidden inside him. Like Kaneki, he possessed Rize's Kagune. But Furuta's strength had been shaped through years of preparation, experimentation, and hatred toward the family that created him. The battle began. Furuta moved with extraordinary speed, forcing Kaneki backward through the underground chamber. Their Kagunes struck against each other, breaking the stone around them. As they fought, Furuta spoke about the world that had shaped him. He had been born into a branch of the Washu family and raised with the knowledge that his life would be short. He had never been allowed an ordinary future. Behind his cruelty remained a simple wish he had buried beneath layers of destruction. He had wanted to live freely. He had wanted an ordinary life with Rize. But instead of fighting to create that life, Furuta had chosen to destroy the world that denied it to him. He manipulated everyone around him until Tokyo became part of his final performance. Kaneki understood the loneliness beneath Furuta's laughter. Their lives had both been changed by Rize. Both had suffered beneath systems created by other people. But Kaneki had found friends who continued reaching for him. Each time he fell, someone reminded him that he did not need to remain alone. Furuta had rejected every hand that might have reached him. Their final attacks collided. Kaneki endured Furuta's Kagune and struck through his defenses. Furuta fell. As he lay dying, he asked Kaneki whether meeting Rize had been the beginning of his tragedy. If Kaneki had never entered that restaurant, he might have remained an ordinary student. He might never have known hunger, torture, war, or the burden of becoming the one-eyed king. Kaneki thought of everything he had lost. Then he remembered everything he had found. Anteku, Toka, Hide, Hinami, the Quink squad, Arima, and the child waiting to be born. Kaneki admitted that his life had contained terrible suffering, but he would still choose the same path. Without it, he would never have become the person standing there. Furuta closed his eyes. For one brief moment, the mockery disappeared from his expression. He imagined the ordinary life he had once wanted. Then Nimura Furuta died. Kaneki continued toward Dragon's final core. Inside, he found Rize. Her body had been used as the source sustaining the creature. The ghoul whose hunger began Kaneki's story had spent years imprisoned and exploited by men who treated her body as a resource. Kaneki destroyed the remaining core, ending the use of Rize's body as Dragon's source. Across Tokyo, the battle ended. The victory did not erase the ruined buildings or restore the people who had died. Humans and ghouls still carried years of fear and resentment between them. But they had fought together. Once people had seen their former enemies risk their lives beside them, it became impossible to return completely to the world that existed before Dragon. 6 years passed. Tokyo was rebuilt. The old CCG was replaced by a new organization in which humans and ghouls worked together to protect the city. Researchers continued developing new ways for ghouls to live without hunting humans. The peace was imperfect, but it was real enough to grow. Old friends followed new paths. Urie continued protecting the city alongside his companions. Juzo remained close to Shinohara after the older investigator finally awakened. Akira and Amon remained together. Nishiki stayed beside Kimi, whose research helped change the future of both species. Hide continued visiting Kaneki. His scars remained, but so did his smile. Toka reopened the cafe. The scent of coffee once again filled a quiet room, where humans and ghouls could sit without hiding what they were. Kaneki and Toka had a daughter. Her name was Ichika. She possessed her mother's energy, her father's curiosity, and a joyful certainty that she belonged in the world. One peaceful day, their friends gathered together. Laughter moved through the cafe and continued outside beneath the open sky. Kaneki watched Ichika run ahead while Toka walked beside him. He remembered the lonely student who had once sat inside a coffee shop reading a book. That young man had believed life was a tragedy written beyond his control. Kaneki understood differently now. The world could be cruel. People could lose themselves, hurt one another, and inherit hatred they never chose. But they could also change. They could share grief. They could choose to understand. And even after a life filled with darkness, they could still find somewhere warm enough to call home. Kaneki reached for Toka's hand. Together, they followed their daughter into the sunlight. And so, after years of hunger, grief, and conflict, Ken Kaneki finally found the home he had spent his life searching for. Thank you for listening to this complete Tokyo Ghoul story with Sleepy Otaku Stories. If you enjoyed the journey, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more peaceful, long-form anime stories. You can also share in the comments which anime you would like to hear next. For now, let the streets of Tokyo fade into the distance. Rest peacefully, dream gently, and good night.